My fusion system, fusing 1,000 chickens at the start. Chapter 641, Show Off. Why should we leave the dragons behind? Are we not worthy to participate in your Dwarven Kingdom's invention competition? With a cold snort, the Light Dragon King, Odyssey, who was in charge of pulling Watson's carriage, returned to his human form and stared at the dwarves in front of him with an unfriendly expression. No, we did not mean that. Please calm down, Lord Odyssey. We let the dragons stay because the Sky Islands are pretty small. With your size, it might be inconvenient for you to go up. Of course, if you want to go, you can, as long as you are in your human form. If you don't want to go, we can prepare good wine, food, and circus performance for you, the Dwarf King explained politely. There's a circus performance? I want to see it. Lily, who was on the back of a dragon, stretched out her hand and said excitedly. Charlotte, who was not far away from her, covered her face and stepped back slightly, distancing herself from her. Then that's it. Those who want to participate in the invention competition will go to the Sky Islands with me. The rest of you can stay here and watch the performance while waiting. Watson did not mind Lily's behavior. He stood up with a smile and waved his hand in the air. Great! Long live His Majesty Watson! Lily shouted and left with the rest of the Dragon Knights. The dragons turned into human forms and followed Watson and Christina. Compared to the local customs, she wanted to see the dwarves' famous technology for the first time. Only by understanding the Dwarven Kingdom's technology would their kingdom be able to respond better. Let's go! Watson urged. The majority of the Dragon Knights and dragons left behind numbered around 150. It was worth noting that the Light Dragon King Odyssey did not stay since he heard there was a circus spectacle below and dwarf beauties who would dance passionately. He decided to withdraw from the invention competition. Seeing the bizarre things the dwarves invented was not as entertaining as seeing them dance. After transforming into human beings, many dragons looked away, disturbed that Odyssey would make such a choice. They appeared to be embarrassed by it. When Prussia, the Dwarf King, heard Watson's comments, he smiled meaningfully and signaled to some of the dwarves to bring Watson and the others to different airships and flew into the sky. Watson was only 14 at the time. Even though he was only an adolescent, his stature was unrivaled among dwarves, much alone the inhabitants of the Kingdom of Kings and the Dragons. He stood out even more among the dwarves. After a few minutes of flight, the airship arrived in the Sky Islands. A golden gate stood in front of Watson and the others. The gate was more than 10 meters tall and was attached to the walls. The top of the wall was adorned with magical cannons. The dark barrels glowed with a menacing gleam. The 1-meter caliber magic cannons might rip apart a platinum-tier elite's defense if launched. The gate was not open at the time, but a little door on the wall near the entrance was opened. The door was 1 meter tall, and only a dwarf could pass through it. Even Watson would have to kneel or crouch down to enter. Watson's demeanor remained unchanged when he noticed the little door. Many of the Dragon Knights and dragons who accompanied him had scowls on their faces. Dwarf King, what do you mean by this? Christina could not help but ask. In response to her question, the Dwarf King grinned, pointed to the small door, and said, "Please forgive us. Dwarves have substantially different physical characteristics than the other races. That door is custom-made to fit the dwarf's height. Because our kingdom did not anticipate visitors from other kingdoms, we did not construct the door at a sufficient height in preparation. You won't mind it, right?" Christina's delicate lips twitched. She did not trust a word of what the Dwarf King said. What did he mean when he said he had no idea the guests from other kingdoms were coming? The Dwarven Kingdom had extended an invitation to the Kingdom of Kings ahead of time. How could they have missed it? She could tell the Dwarf King was trying to brag. The Dwarf King attempted to prevent the dragons from approaching the Sky Islands. She did not comprehend it at first, but she understood it then. It appeared that the dwarves had spent a long time preparing the entrance because they were frightened that allowing the dragons to enter might insult them. That was why they ordered all of the dragons to remain outside. They were terrified of offending the dragons but not the Kingdom of Kings. Those dwarves were utterly inept. Christina scoffed. She put her right hand against the hilt of the sword by her waist, and her body emitted a faint starlight tear aura. Watson had upgraded her to starlight tear after she became the new sword saint. He also made her the leader of the Dragon Knights. Her strength was more than the average person because of her faith in Watson. She was ready to slam the door in front of her. She would carve a way for herself since the dwarves wanted to disgrace the Kingdom of Kings and its monarch. A hand pressed against her shoulder as she was about to draw the blade. Christina, do not be too hasty. The Kingdom of Kings is here with sincerity. We wish to establish a pleasant and mutually beneficial partnership with the Dwarven Kingdom. How can you demolish other people's city walls simply because you disagree with them? We must maintain the dignity of the nobleman since the Dwarf King has prepared a door for us. But there are no buts. Leave the rest to me. He made Christina take a step back with only a few words. Watson approached the city gate and stretched his body in front of her frightened gaze. Then I will be the first to go in. The Dwarf King stood to the side, his eyes blazing, without saying anything. He did set up the city gate to humiliate Watson. He had to demonstrate to Watson that his kingdom was not easily bullied. If he exhibited those weapons later, he would only be able to obtain double the outcome with half the work. He had anticipated Watson's reaction after being treated in such a manner. He could deal with Watson whether he was angry or turned around to go, but Watson was about to enter the city through the city gate. The other dwarves nearby breathed a sigh of relief. They expected the king of the Kingdom of Kings to order the Dragon Knights to attack them if they had been treated cruelly. However, Watson had accepted their agreement rather happily, so they felt a tinge of disdain in their hearts. Even the dwarves knew how to fight back against unfair treatment. How could a kingdom's ruler be so inept? He was regarded with disdain. Watson finished his practice and moved toward the city gate while the dwarves pondered that. His body extended infinitely as he moved, from a height of more than 1 meter to a behemoth hundreds of meters tall. His legs were over 100 meters tall, allowing him to cross the city wall and enter the city effortlessly. That scene took everyone by surprise. Watson exuded wholly different energy than before while he was in his behemoth size. Layers of crimson flames burned on his body under the blessing of fury, and that power belonged to the power of rage from the yin magical source. Watson grew into an angry giant thanks to wrath in his body. It was enough to reduce everything to ash. Many of the dwarves paled and trembled with fear. Your Majesty, we have prepared a door for you. Instead of going in through that, you crossed over our city wall. What do you mean by that? Prussia, the Dwarf King, was also very afraid, but he suppressed his emotions even though he shouted at the top of his head. Since you rarely receive visitors, I do forgive you for not preparing a door that is suitable for us. However, the people in my kingdom are also elites, and ordinary doors aren't worthy of them. Please forgive us, Dwarf King. Watson stood in the air, his voice reverberating like rolling thunder. At the time, he was transforming into an enraged giant with the twisted divine persona mask. That was the signature expression of wrath. Even without twisted divine persona mask's power, he had the might of a demigod, and if he used his own body, he could reach 1,000 meters. Your Majesty, you do make a lot of sense. Ordinary doors are not enough for us. There's no need to be polite. Let's enter the city together. Christina subconsciously believed that it was still Watson's fault after witnessing Watson's style of doing things. Her scarlet lips curved upward, and her body expanded. With her giant-like calves, she walked into the city. Following her, the Dragon Knights and the dragons swelled in size and crossed the city wall outside the Dwarven Kingdom. What happened? Is there an earthquake? The commotion of hundreds of giants entering the kingdom simultaneously caused many dwarves to leave their homes and poke their heads out to take a look. They were shocked when they saw the giants that towered into the clouds and were hundreds of meters tall. What's going on? I heard that today is the day that the king of the Kingdom of Kings brought the humans to participate in the Dwarven Kingdom's invention conference. Those guys are humans. Why do I feel like they're giants? Many of the dwarves had never seen humans. They only have a rudimentary awareness of humanity, according to historical documents. Nonetheless, they could see that the people in front of them were not humans. The dwarves were terrified of being controlled by giants on that fateful day. Dwarf King, we have entered. Where is the venue for the invention competition? Watson bowed his head and gazed down at the ground with his enormous eyes. When he talked, the air he exhaled could cause a storm. Enter through the city gate. After a kilometer, turn right, and you'll see the venue. The frown on King Prussia's face was not flattering. After replying, Watson and the Dragon Knights immediately walked in. Your Majesty, what should we do now? A minister approached King Prussia with a worried look on his face. They were going to use the small gate to show Watson and the others their power, but their guests had turned into giants and intimidated them instead. The dwarves in the city were panicking. Heimerdinger, that is entirely contrary to your expectations. Give me an explanation. King Prussia did not respond. Instead, he turned his gaze toward a group of people not far away. There was an older dwarf with a furry face. Your Majesty, there's no need to be anxious. The small door to intimidate the Kingdom of Kings is only one of our plans. It doesn't matter if it doesn't succeed. After all, the main part of our plan is to let the Kingdom of Kings see our strength. It's a good thing that the Kingdom of Kings is acting so tough now. It proves that they think nothing of us. When they see our powerful weapons later, they'll be even more shocked, and the effect will be even better. That makes sense. Come, let's go in. King Prussia nodded and led a group of ministers into the kingdom. When they entered, they discovered that Watson and the others were still giants, while many dwarves were staring up at them in a stupor. King Prussia could not take a look at them and rushed forward and said, Your Majesty, you have arrived at the invention competition's venue. Please keep your magic under control. Otherwise, you would not be able to blend in as well as it will be difficult to watch. That makes sense. Watson laughed and removed his massive form after noticing that Prussia's words had softened. His physique gradually reduced to the size of an average person. The other dragon knights and dragons also shrank their bodies. Please follow me. Next, I will lead you to the VIP seats and take a good look at our kingdom. Watson and the others arrived at a massive venue, led by the Dwarf King. The space was circular, with long exhibition tables placed in a circle from the center outward. There were unusual objects on the tables, and other things that could not fit were positioned around the tables. There were thousands of tables throughout the venue, and at least 100,000 goods were on show. Please allow me to make a brief introduction. We have specifically asked the King of the Kingdom of Kings and his people to come and attend the invention competition. If you have any, you can show off your greatest work. I will lavishly reward you if they are unusual enough to pique the interest of the King of the Kingdom of Kings. After directing Watson and the others to the left side of the VIP seats, the Dwarf King directed the ministers to the right side and remarked loudly. His voice went far and wide through the two massive sound-amplifying magic devices over his head, reverberating in the hall. All of the dwarves who heard him speak looked giddy. It was not just because of the huge benefits he indicated but also because another king was there to see them. That made them very happy. I announce that the invention competition will begin now. You can now present your work. Following the Dwarf King's voice, many dwarves in the hall became restless and brought forth their works. The format of the invention competition was straightforward. Those who were confident in their work could bring it on the stage for everyone to see. They would be compensated if their work was of high quality. Great noblemen might even acquire some of the items on the spot, and the inventions with the highest transaction value in past years were valued in the tens of millions of gold coins. The person who obtained the highest transaction value would also be crowned the King of Inventions. The first dwarf to present his work was an elderly. His beard had turned white, but his body remained muscular. He pulled a little cart in front of him while holding a hammer in his right hand. His work was loaded onto a trolley. This is the work I created. It is named Handheld Magical Cannon. The idea is comparable to the magical cannons found outside of our kingdom. The magic cannon is difficult to load, and each shot uses a lot of magic crystals, so I improved it. This handheld magical cannon's potency is 1,000th that of the magic cannon. It can injure a gold tier elite. However, it only requires 1,000th of those required by the magic cannon. It can be shot roughly 10 times after being loaded with gold tier stones. It is also very easy to disassemble. Typically, after using it, you only need to remove the magical stones, and it will remain undamaged for several years. The old dwarf extracted the magical cannon from the cart in front of him. It was the length of an arm. During his presentation, the magic cannon fired a ball of burning magic that, when it impacted the earth, caused a hole several meters wide, causing many dwarves to shout out in amazement. That handheld magical cannon is not bad. That improvement can double the strength of our kingdom. If our soldiers are equipped with that weapon in the future, you can only imagine the battle scene. I am delighted with that invention. I will reward you with 10,000 gold coins. King Prussia waved his hand generously. Immediately, a guard carried a massive box for the inventor with shiny gold coins in it. That made the old lover who invented the magical cannon look happy. He repeatedly said, "Long live His Majesty." "Your Majesty, what do you think of that invention?" King Prussia asked Watson, intending to show off. He thought that the handheld magical cannon was incredible. Compared to other kingdoms' magical cannons, the Dwarven kingdom had very few, let alone such an advanced one. "It's not bad." Watson nodded and thought to himself, "Didn't I have something similar in my past life?" However, compared to the pistol, the production of the handheld magical cannon was simpler, resulting in a larger body but not enough power. "Not bad." Prussia's expression was unhappy. He felt like Watson was obviously amazed by the magical cannon but deliberately refused to admit it. "Since you say so, you must have seen flaws in the magical cannon, or you have seen better things. I wonder if you can comment on it." "It's not a flaw. It's not bad to create such a weapon, but I have seen better things, indeed." "Since you asked, then I shall comment a little on it." Watson stood up and walked over to the inventor. He took the magical cannon in front of him and examined it. Its structure is to use magical circuits to trigger magic. This will cause the fire to be delayed. I propose adding a layer of saltpeter explosives outside the magical circuits to speed it up. Some high-quality metal can be mixed in as shrapnel to boost its lethality. Other than the firing speed and power, I don't think there is a calibration device on it. That will reduce the accuracy. Such a weapon might accidentally injure one of our own in a battle. Add a scope. In addition, we should also add a layer of safety apparatus on the body to prevent accidental misfiring due to improper placement. When Watson was speaking to Prussia, he did not lower his voice. The entire hall could hear his voice due to his combat aura. The inventor was initially dissatisfied with Watson's statements that disparaged his achievement, but his look became increasingly shocked when he heard Watson's words. He thought that what Watson said was very reasonable. He would not have formed such an opinion if he did not understand the magical cannon. He barely heard a few lines that had bothered him during the study process before they vanished into thin air. He even felt compelled to redevelop the handheld magical cannon. "You are absolutely right. Those issues did not come to my attention during the study process. If I can enhance it according to your suggestion, its power will be 10 times stronger, and the size will be smaller. I am surprised that humans have such a great comprehension of innovations too. I am wondering whether I can seek your counsel if I have any concerns about future research." The old dwarf sighed and looked at Watson with admiration. "If I am still here, then I will gladly help you. After all, inventing and creating is something that benefits the world." "That's great." The old dwarf's expression became more and more respectful. King Prussia's demeanor became increasingly obnoxious. He was surprised that Watson was not only not jealous of their kingdom's creation but also understood it. Furthermore, the inventor had already prostrated himself after only a few phrases. If that continued, the aim of displaying the Dwarven kingdom's strong weaponry to terrify the Kingdom of Kings would not be accomplished. He stood up after exchanging a glance with Heimerdinger, who was nearby. "Your Majesty, what you are saying now is merely speculation. Anyone can do what you say. Those who have invented know that there is a long way to go from theory to practice, and some theories can't even be realized. I wonder if you can do as you just said." "Of course, it is possible. I can demonstrate it to you on the spot, Your Majesty." Watson stretched his finger toward the handheld magical cannon in front of him, sensing the harsh tone in Prussia's remarks. Fusion System, Activate. Chapter 642, Aware of Everything? Following Watson's voice, the handheld magical cannon in front of him split into several pieces. Then, several handheld magical cannons were transformed into rays of light and fused, turning into a smaller, more gorgeous hand cannon. The palm-sized gun had a scope on it, and the barrel that looked much smaller flickered with a platinum luster. "Congratulations, Master, on fusing multiple handheld magical cannon. You have obtained a peak platinum tier item, the Super Magic Pistol." Platinum tier item, the Super Magic Pistol. Effects: Rapid reloading. You can reload up to 10 magic crystals at a time, one of which is the primary energy source and the other is the backup energy source. Precision strike. The pistol has an automatic aiming function. Platinum star. The flames from the muzzle can penetrate the defense of a platinum tier powerhouse. Bullet fragments. The bullets of the pistol are made of magic elements wrapped in a metal shell, and when the metal shell is shattered, it will cause large-scale damage. Additional effects: Ignored defense. The bullets from that pistol have armor-piercing functions. Sound elimination. The bullets do not make any sound when they are fired. Watson fired a shot at the ground as he held the super magic pistol in his hand. A metal bullet immediately sunk into the ground after a faint sound. After impacting the ground, the metal shell exploded into a ball of broken steel, much like a sharp dagger cutting the ground. The magical energy contained within the metal shell was released due to the explosion. Scorching magical flames swept the ground, leaving scorch scars. The newly built handheld magical cannon could crush the ground several meters below with a single cannonball, and the super magic pistol that Watson had fused was dozens of times more powerful. The fractured metal shell alone may cause the same amount of damage, not to mention the subsequent high-temperature flames. It was hot enough to turn platinum tier ores into molten lava. The Dwarven elder was forced to take a few steps backward due to the potency of the super magic pistol. He was taken aback by the scene in front of him. "Did you just duplicate several handheld magical cannons and fuse them?" "That is right. The power to duplicate the handheld magical cannons is derived from the ring on my finger. This is a platinum tier artifact known as the Wish for the World Ring. As for the technique to combine handheld magical cannons, it is a secret of our Kingdom of Kings." Watson's expression was unfathomable. He removed a 7-colored ring from his right index finger and handed it to the Dwarven elder. "You can make a wish with the ring 3 times a day. I just made 2 wishes, so there's still one more chance." He could not share the system because it was his most important secret. In a strict sense, the system was also a form of technology. It was natural for the dwarves who championed invention and creation to be astounded by the system's power, let alone the fact that the system could offer the dwarves an impact just by Wish for the World Ring. "I had no idea there was such a magical tool in the world. You simply need to pay half the reward each time to be able to make 3 wishes. Isn't it true that if you insist on making a wish every day, you can only cut one diamond tier tool into 8 pieces? That is simply a divine tool that can improve the kingdom's output." The old dwarf glanced at the tool Watson had handed him over and over again, his face filled with admiration. In his opinion, Watson's ring was far more powerful than the handheld magical cannon he had created. Not to mention, no other tool in the Dwarven kingdom could compete with Watson's ring. Your Majesty, I have improved the handheld magical cannon. I'm curious what you think of my upgraded handheld magical cannon. What do you think of my wish for the world ring? King Watson, the super magic pistol that you have modified is indeed very powerful. It seems that the Kingdom of Kings is also good in invention and creation. As for the wish for the world ring, I wonder how many of those items are in your country. If there were very few of them, the result would not be less either. King Prussia restrained his displeasure and maintained a pleasant appearance on his face. He was, however, silently cursing in his heart. The ring had such a profound effect on the world that it completely defied the rule of conservation of energy. There was no way it could be mass-produced. If there were only 1 or 2 wish for the world rings in the world, 8 or more diamond-tier products would be manufactured every day. It was inconsequential to an entire country. Watson chuckled and extended his hands once he finished speaking, which startled him. He noticed that every finger on Watson's finger was adorned with a wish for the world ring and said, I am sorry, but there are a lot of these rings in the Kingdom of Kings. It is not just me, everyone has one. Even though I have not counted it, I believe there are at least 1 million people who have this ring. 1 million? Prussia's face was filled with astonishment. 1 or 2 rings might be ineffective, but thousands of wish for the world rings would be significant. The riches that could be garnered by making a wish every day would more than treble a country's national strength. He had a feeling Watson was bragging, but he could not uncover any proof. He had intended to slap Watson in the face with the Dwarven Kingdom's creations, but they were ultimately defeated. King Prussia clenched his teeth. He knew he could not go on like this. The handheld magical cannon was not the first invention to be displayed. Compared to all of the works presented at the invention conference, it can only be called ordinary. Someone else's creation must be more powerful than that. Heimerdinger, go get me some decent pieces. King Prussia, who had just been applauding the handheld magical cannon, changed his strategy at that moment. Heimerdinger stood up respectfully at his request. He walked to a corner of the venue after nodding to Watson and the people from the Kingdom of Kings. He was aware of what King Prussia was thinking. Watson must have been terrified by the weaponry he was about to display. He could no longer enable individuals who participated in the competition to display their artwork freely. The site was set up just for an invention competition, but there were only weapons. Some of the weapons were cutting-edge technology that he had requested someone to plant on his behalf. All he needed to do was to display those cutting-edge technologies in front of Watson. The second contestant is the champion of last year's invention competition. The weapon he showed us is a bionic magical beast. Heimerdinger pulled a proud middle-aged man in his 30s to the center of the venue. Next to the middle-aged man was a magical beast more than 10 meters long and several meters tall, emitting a powerful platinum-tier aura. The surface of the magical beast's body was covered with hard ores. Gears connected its joints. On its back were pitch-black cannons that looked different from ordinary magical beasts. That magical beast looked more like a giant machine. The bionic magical beast is a brand new innovation I created this year. It is hardly an exaggeration to call it the most spectacular invention in recent dwarves' history. The bionic magical beast has the offensive power of a platinum-tier magical beast and much more formidable defense power. People can use it to conduct exploration, search, and other operations such as combat. At the same time, the bionic magical beast still possesses a basic intellect. As long as it is given a command, it will rigorously obey it and not deviate from it. All of the aforementioned are the bionic magic beast's basic skills. Next, I would like to discuss its most potent component. That is, it can transform into a 4-wheeled cart or grow wings and fly. It can even address the problem of travel with the bionic magical beast. It will eventually penetrate every area of the Dwarven kingdom. After the introduction, the haughty middle-aged dwarf gestured to the bionic magical beast beside him. The bionic magical beast, which was more than 10 meters long and had a menacing appearance, spread its four limbs and folded them into wings on the ground. The gears on its abdomen and chest were linked together, forming four massive wheels. Its rear was sunken downward, revealing a large compartment for at least 2 persons. It moved fast on the ground by using the wheels. The gigantic wheel produced by the bionic magic beast's gears shrank into its body after a brief movement. It flew into the sky as the wings made by its four limbs fluttered. It was also not slow in terms of speed. The bionic magical beast could transform into a four-wheeled transport or a flying tool by spreading its wings. It was a magical beast with formidable combat abilities. It had to be claimed that it was a very exquisite innovation in that world. Aside from magical monsters that could transform into numerous forms, it was uncommon to see a four-wheeled vehicle that could be operated without the use of a mount. It was no surprise the middle-aged dwarf felt so pleased with himself. He had every reason to feel proud of himself for creating such a new object. "Your Majesty, what do you think of that invention?" Heimerdinger turned around and asked, his eyes shining. The bionic magical beast seemed to be very powerful, but it was only a semi-finished product in reality. Since it was made entirely of ores and metal gears and magical stones powered it, the bionic beast would consume many magic stones every time it moved. Just walking a kilometer would consume an entire platinum-tier magical stone. Reducing energy consumption had always been a problem that the bionic beast could not overcome. The Dwarven kingdom only needed to show the weapon's strength. As for the flaws, as long as they did not say anything, Watson would not know. The person who won the title of King of Invention in the last term was Heimerdinger's student. He had also participated in the development of bionic beasts, so he was very clear about their strength. He believed that invention would make Watson cry out. However, what surprised him was that, after listening to the introduction of bionic beasts, Watson reached out to stroke his chin and shook his head. "That invention is not very good. It's better than the previous one." "What do you mean?" His statements made the middle-aged inventor of bionic creatures appear dissatisfied. "You stated that the invention is not very good. Please tell me what is going on." The middle-aged dwarf appeared to be adamant that Watson would not be allowed to leave if he did not understand what he said that day. "The reason I claimed that invention is not good is that it appears to have many purposes, but they are all showy and unreal," Watson said, not standing in ceremony. "To begin with, the ability to turn into a four-wheeled vehicle may not be faster than a magically powered horse. The replacement of magical stones regularly will result in a more significant consumption. This item will not gain popularity. If I pursue the speed of traveling on land, I don't even need a carriage. Anything I create will have better attributes than the bionic magical beast." Watson pointed to the ground and ignited the system's fusion as he spoke. The ground emitted light and transformed into a platinum-colored road due to his fusion. On the gleaming platinum-colored ground, teleportation circles emerged. "This is the magical passage I created. It's also platinum tier. There's a magical array on that platinum tier passage. By absorbing the magic elements in the air and operating it, it can instantly teleport people to any place that the passage can reach. In terms of speed, it's far faster than the bionic magical beast. In terms of maintenance costs, it's far less expensive than using magic stones. Without maintenance, that path could be used for decades without any problems." Watson waved his hand, and a dragon knight stood up and proceeded to the tunnel he had made. His body vanished when it lit up, and he reappeared at the end of the tunnel outside the arena. The dragon knight reappeared, accompanied by a blaze of light from the teleportation circle. The voyage of several kilometers took less than a second, confirming Watson's claim. Ignoring the Heimerdinger and the middle-aged dwarf, whose attitudes were becoming increasingly glum, Watson said, "In terms of flying speed, the bionic magical beast has no edge. Can it outrun the dragon no matter how quickly it flies? It is impossible to compare the speed of travel on land to that of the magical tunnel I built. It cannot be compared to the dragons in terms of flying speed. In terms of battle strength, a platinum tier magical beast is utterly unrivaled. Overall, the bionic magical beast is a piece of garbage. The so-called invention is the creation of a tool that outperforms the present item. Combining these existing tools will result in something that appears to have multiple functions. That is not what you would call an invention. It is basically stealing other people's ideas. Even if it is plagiarized, that piece of work is not deemed top-notch. Previously, I developed an item known as the Deep Sea Submarine. It also combines combat power and ship capabilities. It is quite similar to your bionic beast. I will show you. The earth in front of Watson began to quake as he waved his hand. Dense water elements accumulated on the ground's surface, forming a pool of water that was neither too large nor too little. The water's surface rose to form the shape of a magical array. Sky blue magic symbols surged within one by one. From within, a massive pitch-black submarine drifted forth. Many of the dwarves were perplexed by the iron shell-like seal structure. Their astonishment quickly turned to surprise when they noticed the submarine swimming freely beneath the ocean. That was not something that a standard spacecraft could do. The submersible remained motionless no matter how much the water's surface trembled. It was impenetrable to even a drop of water. The deep-sea submarine jumped out of the ocean after circling twice under the water. With a single shake of its body, it transformed into a formidable diamond-tier magical beast with massive tentacles and scarlet eyes. The magical beast that the deep-sea submarine changed into was a truly magical beast with its own intelligence, as opposed to the bionic magical beast. It could recover energy by eating instead of devouring magic stones, and its battle strength was much greater. How is that possible? The middle-aged dwarf's face was filled with disbelief when he saw the mystical beast that the deep-sea submarine had converted into, and he sat on the ground with a pale face. He had constructed a bionic magical beast with the ideal appearance and skills similar to a real magical beast. It was made of machinery on the inside and could be replaced with various pieces. However, using ores and metals to create a live entity was easier said than done. What he had been unable to do before now materialized in front of him. Watson's submarine was clearly a more evolved version of his bionic magical beast. What Watson had said to him earlier had initially made him skeptical, but he could not reject it. Watson's comprehension of inventions was definitely superior to him to develop a deep-sea submarine. I am surprised that King of the Kingdom of Kings was so knowledgeable about inventions. Since that is the case, I will no longer conceal it. I have an invention here. I hope His Majesty can help in assessing it. Heimerdinger clenched his fists. He did not anticipate that even the invention competition's former winner would amaze Watson with his inventions. Instead, they were devalued to the point of insignificance. The crucial point was that Watson's comments were perfectly sensible, and he could not think of any way to reject them. If that trend persisted, it would be hard to achieve the goal of utilizing the invention competition to scare Watson. He clenched his teeth and resolved to show his trump card. A girl with half a robotic body and white hair approached him after hearing his voice. "Meryl, let His Majesty witness the mechanical language you invented." Heimerdinger's beard curled upward as he pointed at Watson angrily. "Yes, Master." Meryl went out and began writing green symbols in the air with her semi-mechanized arm. Those green symbols formed a flood of numbers in the air, which fused into her mechanical arm. Her mechanical arm was promptly upgraded. Metal and gears continued to move, and one by one, thick and lengthy gun barrels appeared. The ground melted as scorching lasers flashed across it. Mechanical language can upgrade weapons, and it can also perform complex calculations on behalf of the human brain. You haven't seen that before, have you? Watson, to his dismay, was not only unsurprised, but his expression became strange. What kind of machine language is that? Is it not just a computer language? Using binary to perform calculations, the different combinations of two numbers can contain all commands. Others might not comprehend what Meryl was doing, but he was well aware of it. The numerals generated by 0 and 1 were too similar to his modern computer language. It was obvious that the Dwarven kingdom wanted to show him their powerful strength, but he could not hold it in any more. That so-called machine language did not seem to be as diverse as the computer language. I did not expect you to understand that. If that's the case, then I don't need to be polite to you. Heimerdinger's face darkened. He opened his right hand and followed his movements. The ground suddenly cracked open, and a huge light shield appeared. Inside the light shield was a massive chess piece. 3 little balls on the chess piece were circling in a perfect circle. They could not touch it no matter how hard they tried. At that moment, Heimerdinger summoned that chess piece, which was the Dwarven race chess piece. The goal was to use the race chess piece's power to conjure a powerful weapon. The Dwarven chess pieces had total technological power. They had the ability to conjure formidable weapons from another time. Since they had not learned the mechanical language, the items they summoned were haphazard. It was different then. Since the invention competition could not convince Watson, he would use future technology that even the dwarves could not understand to intimidate Watson. Next, I'm going to summon a weapon that you've never seen before. It's a bomb. The power of the explosion is enough to destroy a country. In the place of the blast, there will still be strong radiation. Plants can't grow, and all living creatures living in them will become deformed. That kind of weapon. Say no more. Isn't that an atomic bomb? Before Heimerdinger could finish, Watson had already answered him. His words almost made Heimerdinger spit out a mouthful of blood. Was it over? Watson had previously only remarked on their creation after seeing it. He could understand it despite his lack of understanding. He had not even finished speaking yet, and Watson had already rendered his verdict. It was simply incredible. After all, he was attempting to summon technology that did not exist at the time. He was perplexed by that. Was the guy in front of him aware of everything? Chapter 643, The God of Destruction's Invasion. Release the Dwarven chess piece. I am Heimerdinger, and I summon weapons that do not belong to this era. Holding back the sullen emotions in his heart, Heimerdinger reached out his hand and wrote something similar to the mechanical language that Merrill had developed before. He also sent those mysterious symbols into the Dwarven chess piece, and as the symbols entered, the dwarf chess piece immediately burst with a bright light, and a huge connection opened to the door of the future. The door was formed by an invisible hand. It looked translucent and hourglass-shaped. At that moment, the hourglass-shaped door was spinning rapidly in the air. A pitch-black bomb emerged from the inside. The bomb was nearly 100 meters long, and its entire body was in the shape of a shuttle. It was covered with a hard iron shell. Long iron nails surrounded each iron shell. It seemed that the maker was worried that the iron shell was not strong enough and that the things inside would leak out. The entire bomb appeared to be under pressure. King Watson, how about this weapon? Heimerdinger's eyes flickered. Before he took out the item, Watson had already made a judgment. It was very difficult to convince him. In his opinion, Watson might be talking nonsense at that time, so he summoned the weapon made from the Dwarven chess piece to see Watson's reaction. Didn't I say that it was an atomic bomb? Unexpectedly, Watson's expression became more determined. It was as if Watson had not been so sure before he heard him say it, but then he was entirely sure. Unable to see that Watson was lying, Heimerdinger gritted his teeth. I'm going all out. Releasing the Dwarven chess piece's full power. The dimensional door floating above the Dwarven chess piece enlarged in response to his words, and numerous items were ejected from the massive entrance. There were huge black bombs in those items, but there were also sealed four-wheeled carriages coated in iron shells, battleships spitting flames, weird polyhedrons floating in the air, and so on. That is a car. That one over there is called a plane. I can't believe that even satellites can be made. Impressive. Every time Heimerdinger made something, Watson would applaud while exclaiming in admiration, as if he knew quite a bit about the things that were made. He did not expect that the Dwarven chess piece ability was that Those modern weapons might have been very impressive to the Dwarven kingdom, but to him, a transmigrator with a modern soul, those were already commonplace. What is going on? Heimerdinger panted heavily, his eyes red. Those weapons clearly came from the future, and even he did not know them. How could Watson know that? Did he come from the future? That was a bit unrealistic. He did not want to believe what Watson said, but while he was surprised, Watson had already leaped into the object called a car, created by the Dwarven chess piece. Soon, the car started to move. Watson drove the strange technological product around the square with a strange roar. It only took him a few minutes to complete the circle. The car was dozens of times faster than an ordinary horse carriage in terms of speed. It also seemed to be wrapped in an iron shell, so it was very safe. Opening the door, Watson got out of the car and looked around. He found that the dwarves around him were shocked. He used his actions to prove that he understood those things. Heimerdinger could not even retort. After a long while, he snapped back to his senses and took out a piece of iron with a red button that looked like a remote control. I still have one last invention. I want to show it to the king of the kingdom of kings. The device in my hand is the key to a certain door. As long as I press it, a mysterious door will appear in the sky. It will connect to a different space outside the current world. It can even connect to the divine realm and let the gods descend. Before Heimerdinger could finish his words, Watson had already come to his side with a smile on his face. It's such a magical thing. Hurry up and give it a try. As he said, Watson did not hesitate to come to Heimerdinger's side. He helped press the button. An irregular sphere appeared in the air in 4 directions with a beep. Those 4 spheres emitted rays of different colors that converged in the air. The 4 beams collided and opened a door of different colors in the air. There was deep darkness beyond the door. Nothing could be seen behind it, but there was a sensation of danger, as well as a pitch-black wind that fell, making the dwarfs throughout the invention competition arena tremble. What have you done? Heimerdinger's voice trembled. He was dumbfounded. That device that connected different worlds was his final trump card. He had taken it out to tell Watson, even if the Dwarven kingdom did not have the military strength to resist the kingdom of kings, as long as he used that device, he could open the door to the realm of gods, allowing the gods to come down and serve as a deterrent. Who would have thought that Watson would press the button in his hand? Open the gate to the divine kingdom. The things that the Dwarven kingdom invented look very ordinary to me, but that invention is not bad. Watson raised his head and looked at the top of his head, speaking as if he was not paying attention. They had exhibited enmity from the minute the Dwarven kingdom let them through the gate. He had a rough idea of what the Dwarven kingdom was thinking because he had merged 3 kingdoms at once, making the dwarves fearful. As a result, he intended to use the invention competition to help him grasp the strength of the Dwarven kingdom. He was first concerned about what might happen if the Dwarven kingdom truly possessed formidable technological weaponry. As a result, it appeared that the Dwarven kingdom's power was only mediocre. He had purposefully opened the entrance to the divine kingdom at that time. Because the dwarves wanted him to grasp their kingdom's power, he would do the opposite and demonstrate his own power to the dwarves. A thick and long tentacle shot through the great black hole in the sky while he was staring, and then a pitch-black pillar-like monster spread out. At the front of the black pillar was smooth armor of the same color. If one looked carefully, one would find that it was not some armor but something that looked like a fingernail. The black pillar also revealed its full appearance, and it was a finger. The single finger was several meters long. A majestic and mighty voice broke out as the finger fell. Which universe is this? To have the audacity to open a portal to the divine kingdom? The energy inherent in this kingdom appears to be incredibly powerful. If I can swallow this world, my might will increase from starlight to peak starlight tier. The overpowering voice shook the dwarves in the room to the point of dizziness. In pain, they crouched and grasped their heads. Some dwarves had already dropped onto the ground, white foam pouring from their mouths due to a lack of physical condition. A gigantic black palm that resembled the sky was hidden behind the pitch-black fingers. On the palm, there were 6 fingers. The 2 palms grabbed the black hole's edge and violently tore it apart. The hole was instantly ripped open. After the hole was ripped apart, a naked deity appeared over Watson and the others. His physique was so massive that it took up the entire sky. He was naked because there was not much skin on his body, and there were many arms around his body. The arms seemed to have been cut off, and the cuts were smooth. They were twisted together. There was even a hand on the god's face, making it impossible to see his facial features clearly. A powerful and evil aura emanated from the god's body, enveloping the entire Dwarven kingdom. "My name is Yesmala, the god of destruction. Why don't you mortals pay your respects to me and obediently offer up your faith?" Yesmala, the god of destruction, looked down. There was a black palm on his face, and there were no facial features under the palm. He did not need to use his eyes to see, as the surrounding scenes were clearly displayed in his mind. The black arms around his body were the symbols of his 100-handed giant race. Each arm was condensed from countless lives, and each of those arms could turn anything they touched into dust. The authority he held as the god of destruction was convulsion, apart from destruction. This small world has a very powerful aura, but there aren't many gods' auras around it. "It's really strange," Yesmala muttered in his heart. The divine kingdom was a boundless black void. In that endless black void, the only place that had light was the divine kingdom of the gods, plus the worlds that were wrapped in light spheres. The worlds in those light spheres were all lands that had collapsed due to the Battle of the Strong in ancient times or even further back. One of them was the world he had plunged into at the time. In the divine realm, there were innumerable little world fragments floating around. The gods' fortresses surrounded such world fragments and watched the mortals live via the barrier. The gods' might was too enormous to pass past the barrier into the interiors of those realms. Otherwise, it was quite likely that the worlds would be destroyed, and they needed to absorb the mortals' beliefs from the worlds. That led to an unwritten rule in the divine realm. The gods could not take the initiative to invade the world fragments. Of course, some world fragments could not withstand the power of the gods before they reached the starlight tier, so they could not directly interfere with the actions of the mortals in the world fragments. However, they could indirectly influence the world by becoming the gods that the kingdom worshipped. The powerful world fragments belonged to powerful gods, which were usually organized. They were led, for example, by a god king. Unfortunately, the angel king was assassinated. The realm was ruled by another god who was not yet in the sovereign tier, severely limiting his power to dominate. Many scattered gods were assembled in that place. He was one among them, and the world fragment was found by coincidence. Initially, he explored the divine realm, looking for a suitable-sized planet fragment that gods had already occupied. Then he would talk it over with the gods to see if he could obtain a piece of the action. As a result, that world fragment intruded into his field of vision. There were no gods in that world, and a large hole was revealed outside the protective membrane. The aura of the world kept leaking into the divine realm. The leaked aura was clearly at the starlight tier, which proved that that world fragment was at the starlight tier and could withstand the power of the gods. He could not help but be curious when he saw that a god had accidentally cracked the outer shell of that realm, so he went there to take a look. He discovered no other god's aura save his own, which made him immensely delighted. The gods had a rule that they could not interfere with the operation of the world fragment, nor could they aggressively burst through the barrier and descend into the world. However, they did not state that they would be unable to enter if a fracture emerged in the world fragment. Yesmala was delighted to have discovered a treasure after already treating the environment as his own product. "Why are you still hesitating?" he said. "Are you looking down on the god of destruction that you do not kneel now? Those who do not fear the gods will have only one end, and that is death." As he spoke, he held out his right hand, which was wrapped around a pitch-black arm, toward a huge mountain peak outside the Dwarven kingdom on the floating islands. Divine power of destruction. A powerful vibration radiated out from the direction of his attack, traveling through the air and reaching the peak. The mountain immediately collapsed in the middle of the combat, and gravel tumbled to the ground. They disintegrated into smaller stones and powder in the atmosphere. In a matter of seconds, a 1,000-meter-tall mountain was reduced to ashes. That scene astounded every dwarf in the Dwarven kingdom. Yezmala retracted his right hand and slightly loosened his fingers, revealing the joy in his heart. The mortals were hesitant because they did not comprehend the god's strength. They had no choice but to submit since they had seen his methods. Watson raised his head and looked at the god who called himself the god of destruction, his expression calm. He ventured to employ Heimerdinger's tool, so he was naturally confident in dealing with the gods. He had met gods many times before and recognized their strength. There were 100,000 gods on Mount Creation, and he was a demigod. Ordinary gods would not be in his view if it were not for the God King commanding a massive army of gods to attack the world he was in. I feel that the god of destruction's information is similar to the 7 gods from the Holy Dragon Kingdom. It hasn't reached the level of the god of light, Baldur. Compared to the primordial Demonis, it's much weaker. I should be able to deal with him alone. Watson pondered it. The starlight robe on his body fluttered in the wind. The end of the robe turned into 2 wings, flapping as he floated into the air. He had not fought for a long time after entering the demigod tier. The god of destruction in front of him was just right for him to try and see what level he was at. God of destruction, right? If you want us to submit, first let me see if you have the qualifications to do so. He made a strong war proclamation in front of the god of destruction. As he assessed the human in front of him, Yezmala's body shrank to the size of an average person. The young man's aura was strong in his presence. He belonged to the demigod tier. The crown on his head and the starlight robe over his body revealed the young man's identity. You are the king of this world. I can be considered the king of a kingdom. Yezmala's heart sneered at the other party's remark. He had no idea how many kingdoms existed in that world, but there could not be too many. If he had power over the ruler of a kingdom, his subjects would undoubtedly surrender to him. With that in mind, he reached out his arm to the young man in front of him without hesitation. The portion of his arm that had been wrapped around his hand floated out. Hundreds of arms grabbed Watson in midair from all angles. Divine power of destruction. Hundreds of arms simultaneously emitted devastating waves. That wave alone has the power to break mountains, let alone fuse them. The enormous energy shattered the stars. He did not hold back against Watson because he had seen many gods who maintained eternal youth and immortality after he became a god. Those gods who looked young might have lived for a long time. The young man in front of him might be in the same situation. Faced with hundreds of destructive waves, Watson did not say anything, but screams came from below. Run! The gods have descended. To fight against the gods, the king of the kingdom of kings is too bold. The dwarves in the competition arena picked up their inventions and left. Some dwarves were so panicked that they forgot to take their inventions and ran with their heads held high. Protect His Majesty and leave. The ministers called for the guards and escorted Prussia and the princess out. Prussia passed by Heimerdinger, who was standing around the dwarven chess piece in a daze, and the beard on his face blew angrily. Heimerdinger, you idiot, what are you still looking at? Quickly put away the race chess piece and leave this place. He could not help but feel enraged as he remembered the strategy that Heimerdinger had previously suggested to him. Initially, Heimerdinger said it reasonably well and utilized the opportunity to intimidate Watson, but Watson was not threatened in the end. Instead, a malevolent god had appeared in the sky above the Dwarven kingdom. That god would invade their kingdom after dealing with Watson. He should not have listened to Heimerdinger's words if he had known sooner. The Dwarven kingdom did not believe in gods since they were fascinated with research. Gods were simply larger creatures in their view. As long as they continued to advance in technology, they would be able to employ external items to bridge the gap between them and the gods. Wait a moment, Your Majesty. Look! Heimerdinger snapped back to his senses when he heard the words. His eyes lit up, and his fingers that were pointing at the sky trembled slightly as if he had seen something incredible. What are you showing me? What's there to see? Watson had flown into the skies to battle the gods for more than 10 seconds. Watson, he reasoned, might be dead. He truly admired Watson at the time. He appeared young, yet he was well versed in technology. Even the Dwarven kingdom's old craftsmen could not compete with him. Furthermore, he possessed a great deal of bravery. He even dared to rush up to stop the god. King Prussia sighed. If he had been 20 years younger, he might have been as ruthless as Watson. However, he was only thinking about how to save his life at that moment. He raised his head and looked at the sky with that thought in mind. He was taken aback by what he observed with a single glance. The scene of Watson being crushed by the god of destruction did not appear. The hundreds of arms around the god of destruction's body came in front of Watson with destructive waves. They stopped moving 1 meter in front of him. Instead, a golden-green chess piece floated out of Watson's chest and extended an index finger toward the god of destruction. The blazing pillar of light pierced through the layers of arms and directly opened a massive hole in the god of destruction's chest. Pure energy radiates from within. Dazzling divine blood fell from the heavens and rolled in the air, growing to the size of red waterfalls that crushed most of the ground in the hall. How is that possible? King Prussia shouted in his heart. Did the king of the kingdom of kings defeat the god of destruction? Chapter 644, An army of 100,000 gods. How is that possible? The god of destruction, Yesmala, had a terrified expression on his face. The arms wrapped around his body were severely injured. The youth in front of him had just casually pointed a finger, and a wave of energy that surpassed the level of normal starlight tear had entered his body and wreaked havoc on it. It looked like he had the strength of a demigod. However, in a real battle, the youth's strength was even stronger than his. How is there an existence that can stand shoulder to shoulder with a god in this small mortal world? And what is that thing on his chest? Is that a race chess piece? What kind of style is it? I don't think I have ever seen it before. He stared blankly at Watson's chest, that golden-green chess piece. With his experience as a god, he could see that it was a complete race chess piece. However, even though he had participated in the ancient wars, he could not tell which race that chess piece had belonged to. He touched the hole in his chest, and he used divine power to heal it. Yesmala's heart was filled with greed. Perhaps the demigod was powerful because of the race chess piece. The race chess piece was a starlight tier item. If he could obtain that race chess piece, his strength would increase significantly. With that thought in mind, he decided to use all his strength to kill the youth in front of him. After entering the world, he initially wanted to turn everyone into his believers. He did not use his strongest form to prevent his divine power from causing damage to the world. However, he could no longer care about that. Even if he used his full strength and thousands of people died from the aftershocks of his power, he would not be able to resist the temptation of the race chess piece on Watson's chest. Hundred-handed giant form. Yesmala roared as countless arms around his body flew into the air. An illusory spirit body extended from the back of the arms and connected to his body. His body also expanded. He had become a giant that was thousands of meters tall and covered the entire sky. That giant did not have any facial features. His face was blank, and his body was very smooth. His arms and legs were long and thin. Hundreds of arms were on his back, looking extremely horrifying. At that moment, those arms extended from the sky to every corner, enveloping the entire Dwarven kingdom. Without a doubt, as long as Yesmala wanted to, he could raise the entire Dwarven kingdom at any time. The dwarves looked even more terrified. They were pale, and their lips were trembling. No one knew what kind of reaction they were having. That chess piece, and even the world, will belong to me, the god of destruction. Watson's body was under immense strain as it faced the god of destruction in its altered form. After changing its form, the god of destruction's power became even more powerful. There was a strange vibration from his arms. Whatever came into contact with that vibration, whether it was the mountains, rivers, or the walls of the Dwarven kingdom, it would collapse. That vibration was also transmitted. With the god of destruction as the center, it continued to spread to the surroundings. If the vibration were not controlled, it would one day expand to the Earth's limits, causing the entire world to collapse. That is the true power of the gods. Watson could not help but sigh in his heart. He was not confronted with a god who had been resurrected using someone else's body, nor was he confronted with a reincarnated child of God at that time. Instead, he was confronted with a true god who had fallen from the outside world. That god's aura was fundamentally different from the god he had fused. Fortunately, he had raised the world's level. Otherwise, the old world would have crumbled simply because that deity had entered, throwing everyone into the endless universe. Even though the god of destruction was extremely powerful, Watson's heart was filled with a fighting spirit. Since his transmigration to that world, he had encountered a slew of formidable foes. He would spend a long time honing his steel will. It was more accurate to say that the more powerful the adversary, the more potential he possessed. Mask of Divinity, the power of wrath. Red flames engulfed Watson's body. His body proceeded to grow until he was the size of the god of destruction. 2-kilometer-sized monsters were squabbling. The Dwarven kingdom was completely covered by the shadow that hid the sunshine. Watson's rage turned into sharp arrows after transforming into a giant, colliding with the god of destruction's hundreds of thick and lengthy arms. Some of the arrows were seized and broken by the god of destruction's arms, while others pierced his chest and lower abdomen, causing him to cry in anguish. That was a great battle between the gods. The sky was filled with red meteor-like lights and giant arms that were like mountains. Should we go up and help? A few dragon knights came behind Christina. They asked worriedly as they looked up at the sky. There's no need. Christina shook her head, her eyes flickering. With His Majesty Watson's strength, that god is no match for him. Furthermore, His Majesty's fight must have a deeper meaning. Before His Majesty summons us, we should not act rashly. That makes sense. The Dragon Knights agreed and spread out to shield the dwarves, preventing them from being harmed by Watson's conflict with the god of destruction. The Kingdom of Deception, the great sword that destroys the world. Watson's fierce arrow rain clashed with the god of devastation for a short time. The god of destruction could not stop himself from roaring and summoning a massive divine kingdom. Huge bells were hanging everywhere in the divine kingdom, and they were constantly ringing. There were even a few giants in the divine kingdom. Those colossi were blinded and had their ears covered. They were ringing the bells on the divine kingdom's towers aimlessly. Those bell-ringing giants were responsible for the powerful vibrations. The gods in the outside world were more powerful than the gods that Watson had fused with the system. The gods of the outside world absorbed their beliefs and became gods. As a result, they had followers. Those giants, who had their 5 senses shut, worshipped the god of destruction. The gap around the divine kingdom shattered at that moment, and the air became thin. The god of destruction yelled and drew a massive blade from the divine kingdom. That sword was fully translucent and made entirely of vibration energy. It stretched for over 1,000 meters. The god of destruction swiped his massive blade across the ground. A single blow from that blade could not endure the rain of arrows in the heavens. Everything was trembling and shattered. The sky was ready to split in half, and Watson's body was going to break in half as well. Watson pressed his palms together and slapped his chest. Unruly and proud scales. As a result of his activities, a massive scale appeared beneath him and the god of destruction. It was difficult to comprehend how enormous that magnitude was. The 2 pallets on the scale held him and the god of destruction, respectively, and there was still plenty of room on the scale. The scale's 2 pallets were shaking up and down at the time. The god of destruction's blade was stuck in its own pallet, unable to escape. The pallet Watson was on kept falling during the weighing process, and the god of destruction's body was lifted. That maneuver was one of Pride's powers that came with the twisted divine persona mask. The idea was to utilize Pride to assess the worth of both sides in a conflict. The lesser value side would collapse and die immediately. The god of destruction was a god, but Watson possessed multiple peak tier starlight tier tools. After being fused, his race chess pieces became sovereign tier tools. It was worth more than the god of destruction. As a result, after a few seconds of measurement, the scales vanished and were replaced by a massive sword several times the size of the blade in the god of destruction's hand. It rained down his head. Roar! The massive sword slashed half of the god of destruction's body open with a ferocious yell. Half of his arms were also reduced to ashes. The gigantic body collapsed to the ground, and blood poured like a stream. It was no longer possible to put a stop to it. After gravely hurting the god of destruction with a single stroke, Watson did not stop. He continued to use the twisted divine persona mask's ability. Perfect Envy Clone. The clone of absolute envy could duplicate an enemy's clone and inherit all kinds of abilities and thoughts. As long as the enemy's strength did not exceed the level of a star's brilliance, he would not be able to resist his duplication. The clone that he had duplicated was naturally the god of destruction. His clone was undamaged than the god of destruction's main body. After the clone was duplicated, the god of destruction's clone immediately rode on his main body, and countless arms suddenly fell, carrying a terrifying aura that could shatter stars. The clone fiercely landed on the god of destruction's body. The power of shock and destruction passed through his body, destroying the nearby mountains and land. Supernatural acceleration. Watson extended his hand and pointed at the clone of utter envy he had manufactured. A stream of light was discharged from each of the 10 starlight tier magical fountains over his head. Watson expanded and injected the race chess pieces into the clone's body with the power of the race chess pieces. The clone of absolute envy, who already possessed the power of a god, had absorbed the energy of 10 magical fountains. It was equivalent to obtaining 10 divine powers at the same time. His attacks carried the characteristics of chaos, death, yin, and other different attributes. The destruction and vibrations alone had already left the body of the god of destruction riddled with holes. At that moment, the god of destruction's main body could not endure the attacks of so many qualities. It was directly hit by the tiniest energy factor, blending into the earth and dissolving. The enormous holes on the ground, which had been bombed into disarray, demonstrated the ferocity of the battle at the time. At the same time, the divine kingdom established by the god of destruction began to crumble in the sky. The kingdom was littered with shards of bright bricks and tiles. The gigantic bell in front of the blindfolded giant ringing the kingdom's bell shattered. Their bodies erupted as well, creating a cloud of blood mist. The divine kingdom was the source of the god's strength. The fall of the divine monarchy revealed that the god's life had come to an end. The Dwarven kingdom, a beautiful kingdom, had crashed in the sky. That scene appeared to be both gorgeous and heartbreaking. The gods are nothing more than that. Watson stood there with his hands behind his back, watching everything coldly. In his opinion, his strength should be around the peak of the starlight tier. His natural strength was that of a demigod, but he possessed the might of several gods. Furthermore, since he had established many sources of magical power in the world, his geographical advantage enabled him to fight against ordinary gods in that world. He also had 4 separate peak stage starlight tier props on him and a fused race chess piece. He could fight a peak starlight tier god if he used all of his strength. The god of destruction in front of him was only at the level of an ordinary god. In his eyes, he was not his match. The divine kingdom in the sky disintegrated rapidly as he waved his hand. In god of destruction's divine kingdom, a ball of black viscous liquid poured out of a crack. The concentrated black liquid wiggled, and the roar from the god of destruction could be heard from within. Broken arms could be seen in the background. That black liquid was the god's remains, condensed from the power of the divine kingdom after the death of the god of destruction. After absorbing that god's remains, one could obtain its corresponding power if one had previously absorbed similar things. Therefore, Watson was not unfamiliar with that. He actually killed the god. At that moment, King Prussia was staring blankly at the sky, his mouth wide open and unable to speak for a long time. Odyssey, the Light Dragon King, had previously told him about Watson's power. Watson would not have conquered two kingdoms and accomplished unification if he had not produced a whole new element that did not fit in that world. He had no idea that Watson's strength was still beyond his conception. Initially, he had summoned Watson and the others to demonstrate the power of the Dwarven kingdom's technology. In the end, the might of their technology was not demonstrated, and instead, Watson's power astounded him and the dwarves. What type of technology would they need to battle against such power to murder a god by himself? King Prussia was conflicted as he overheard the dwarfs beside him say, "It's nothing good, your majesty. Take a look at the sky. The empty expanse in the sky has grown once more. Another god is on his way in." What? King Prussia's demeanor shifted. He hurriedly looked up at the sky and noticed that a few non-human fingers had reappeared above his head in the space tunnel that had been ripped apart by the god of destruction. Those fingers did not appear to be from the same creature. They hooked the space passage and fiercely yanked it in all directions. A few unfathomable behemoths emerged from beyond the space passage. One of the behemoths was entirely made of white bones. Mysterious colors flowed over the white bones. That color did not belong to any known color. As it flowed, it seemed to flow directly into the starry sky. The other behemoth's body was made of a wriggling mass of meat. That wriggling mass of flesh was randomly distributed, some still with facial features. It looked bizarre. The remainder of the monsters had odd shapes as well. Some had a bug's lower body and a human's upper body. Some people were shining from head to toe. It was a massive sphere with the ability to emit light. 8 monsters had broken in, and they were all gods. I can't believe that the world actually has a starlight tier tunnel that connects to the outside world. The twisted and tangled lightning would be enough to burn the sky and penetrate the earth if it spread out. Not far away, the god with the upper body of a human, the bottom part of an insect, and a scornful expression on his face said, "The environment is excellent here. I want a quarter of the kingdom to be turned into a nest of the void insect race." The void insect race was extremely strong in the divine kingdom. The void insect race had complete dominion over space and could freely travel between worlds. Not only were their reproductive capacities powerful, but even adults could reach the starlight tier. "All of you, get out of here. I want this world." While the gods were disputing, the first god who came in opened his lips, his entire body covered in white bones with weird colors running on them. Rolling sound waves stretched out in all directions as the skeleton opened and closed its lips. The pain was tingling in the non-godly being's ears. The gods who were bickering before the skeleton thing spoke calmed down because the skeleton-like monster was well known in the area. It was not typical for starlight tier gods like them. The skeleton creature was the twilight star spirit. It was a great species derived from planet ruins. In their childhood, the twilight star spirits were planets that appeared like any other planet. In the worlds where their bodies evolved, there would also be life. As those living forms continued to reproduce, they would absorb knowledge and grow stronger. They would complete their planetary change when they reached adulthood. They would annihilate all life on the globe. The color that flowed through the bones of extinct living forms would become the hue that flowed through their bones. Those hues were ineffable and appeared hazy because they were generated by the flames of life and the light of civilization rather than by primary colors. That magnificent lineup stunned everyone present, except for Watson, with the peak starlight tier god as the leader and 7 ordinary gods. Even Christina and some dragon knights' expressions changed. Their power was currently at the peak of diamond tier. If they came across a starlight tier opponent, they could fight for a time using Watson's transmission ability. After all, there was a considerable difference between peak starlight tier and typical starlight tier. Watson embodied life at the peak of the starlight tier. He had the ability to annihilate the entire world if he so desired. It's over. It's over. What should we do now? With so many gods barging in, the world will definitely be destroyed. The Dwarven kingdom will also be finished. The dwarves, including King Prussia, were swarming like ants on a hot stove. Heimerdinger was the most composed of the dwarfs. At that moment, he had a look of sadness on his face, and his eyes were filled with remorse. He wished he could travel back in time to the moment he showed Watson the space door. He would not have revealed it to Watson if he had known Watson would not hesitate to open the space door and open the way to the divine kingdom. He was not only remorseful for his acts, but he was also blaming Watson in his heart. Why would he open the space door only for the sake of opening it? Did Watson not utilize his brain to consider what would happen after unlocking the door, or was Watson suspicious because he had lied? Everyone had different thoughts, but Watson looked relatively calm standing in the sky. 1, 2, 3, 8 a total of 8 gods. There appear to be quite a few of them, but regrettably, in terms of numbers, Watson's side had the advantage. Watson muttered as he opened his hands. Globe, open the space passage to the Dwarven kingdom. All Black Moon Knights, heed my orders. Come when I call your name. Watson swiftly called Globe in his heart. He controlled Globe in the City of Steel's underground city, and he could open spatial tunnels in every part of the world. It was sufficient to transfer all of the Black Moon Knights over. That was also why he did not bring any Black Moon Knights with him to the Dwarven kingdom. Even if he did not travel through the worlds, the Black Moon Knights would arrive there in minutes thanks to the god's strength. Black Moon Knights, what is that? No matter what it is just feudal resistance. The gods in the sky were conversing with each other, and their tone was tinged with scorn. A break erupted in the sky above Watson's head just as they were chatting. From behind the massive hole descended a knight clad in black iron armor. The Black Moon Knight's 1st Legion's captain, Alan, had arrived to guard Watson. More black-armored knights appeared behind the black-armored knight. The 2nd Legion's captain, List, and the 3rd Legion's captain, William, pay their respects to you, your majesty. Neither you nor the Kingdom of Kings can be destroyed. Following the course of the black hole, 100,000 Black Moon Iron Knights materialized in the sky above the Dwarven kingdom. Each of them radiated a stellar glow. The frightening auras were linked together, startling the gods and the Dwarven kingdom's inhabitants. They had 100,000 gods. When had they ever seen such a scene? Chapter 645, Conquering the Dwarven Kingdom. What's going on? Why are there so many gods in the mortal world? It seems like those gods have just been upgraded and aren't stable enough. I don't have too much faith in them. However, it's shocking enough to see so many gods have been upgraded in such a small world. One of the gods could not help but exclaim out loud when he saw the 100,000 Black Moon Knights. There were 100,000 gods in the small world, yet that number of gods did not shatter the world. That was something he had not expected. Initially, he had been able to enter that world because he had felt the aura leaking from that place into the divine realm. Then, he discovered the spatial passage. It took a lot of courage for him to build a bridge between his world and the divine world. He thought he had gotten a good deal and could use the spatial passage to occupy that small world to strengthen his own power, but he was no longer certain if he could leave the world in one piece. That spatial passage was very likely deliberately opened to the divine realm, luring the gods into it. I'm sorry, I seem to have come to the wrong place. Mortals, continue with what you're doing. I won't disturb you any further. Another void insect humanoid revealed an awkward smile. The lower half of the insect body spread its numerous legs and flew out of the world at high speed. You can't leave. Watson squinted his eyes and motioned toward the void insect race. The 100,000 gods beside him started an attack immediately under the command of their separate commanders when the majestic divine kingdom appeared in midair. Those Black Moon Knights lacked the trust of others, and the divine realms had not been tempered much. They were little more than a shell. Their might was far inferior to that of the actual divine kingdoms. However, there were 100,000 Black Moon Knights present. Even if a single person's might was insufficient for a god, the combined strength of all of them was far greater than that of an average god. Over 10,000 divine kingdoms surrounded each other at the time. Each divine realm radiated a distinct light corresponding to an unknown altitude in the sky. It seemed as though history's ancient kingdoms had all descended simultaneously. Kingdoms were linked to one another, and many powers filled the planet. Some divine kingdoms were more mundane, such as the Sword and Whirlwind divine kingdoms. Some were also uncommon, such as the Death divine kingdoms. Thousands of diverse powers were contained inside the numerous divine kingdoms. The void insect race that was going to leave changed color as those divine kingdoms encircled it, and more divine kingdoms appeared above their heads as well. The divine kingdom was like a huge beehive-shaped nest. There were many giant insects with different roles working inside the nest. Some insects were shaped like mantises, holding two huge sickles in their hands. Some were like spiders, spitting out threads that weaved into a huge net in midair, and some insects were dragging their huge bellies, laying eggs. No matter what kind of insect it was, the surface of its body had purple veins that symbolized the power of the void. The space around the body of the god of the void insect race shattered layer by layer. The space cracks were like the mouths of monsters, swallowing the Black Moon Knights that were approaching him and the power surrounding the divine kingdom. Hey, a mere mortal! He has just advanced to the starlight tier, yet he thinks he can plunder the authority of a god. What a foolish dream! The god of the void insect race heaved a sigh of relief. His expression became malevolent. He had already decided that he would immediately call for the void insect race's army to destroy that place as soon as he left that world. The void insect race was a race that was similar to humans. They also had powerful reproductive abilities. The difference between them and humans was that the void insect race had a powerful reproductive ability and a powerful strength. Having both made the void insect race currently ranked in the top 100 races in the divine realm. The number of god-tier elites of the void insect race did not exceed 100 million, but their numbers were at least 10 million. Astonishingly, there were 10 million gods, and they were all gods that relied on their own hard work to ascend. Thus, annihilating 100,000 small human-like gods was easy. What does it matter if you are a mortal? It is not as though a mortal could not slay a god. On the contrary, you demonstrated your power as a god after entering this realm. You want to go now that you have realized the situation is not right. Do you think it's that easy? Watson sneered as he heard the void insect god's words. A golden-green race chess piece floated out of his breast, and a deformed mask of divinity with no facial characteristics and embedded with several gemstones appeared on his face. I'm so jealous of my clone. Supernatural acceleration. At the same time, he used the mask of divinity's ability to summon clones and the fused race chess pieces. In the sky in front of Watson, next to the void insect race's god who was fleeing at high speed, its clone appeared. If there were anything different about the new void insect race's god that appeared, it would be that 10 different elemental auras surrounded its entire body. No. When the void insect race's god's doppelganger was in midair, its body suddenly expanded and exploded, fusing purple void energy into the surrounding space, transforming the entire space into an iron bucket. The void insect race's god could no longer tear the space apart within that iron bucket space to devour the Black Moon Knight's attack. Instead, it screamed and watched as thousands of divine kingdoms crashed into his body. The impact of hundreds of divine kingdoms caused the entire earth to tremble, and some of the tall mountains in the Dwarven kingdom below crumbled under the strong shockwave, as did the ground in the deep valley. The Dwarven kingdom was relatively close to the quake's epicenter, so it was severely damaged, as were the other kingdoms worldwide. The entire continental plate was in an earthquake, while the ocean outside the continent stirred up huge waves, with many areas near the sea experiencing waves that were more than 10 meters high. The world was like that. The void insect race's god at the center of the collision had turned into a puddle of meat. The juice splattered everywhere. There appeared a puddle of pitch-black substance. Watson hooked his hand and grabbed it. "Congratulations, Master, for obtaining a Starlight Tier product. The remains of the void insect race's god can be used to obtain the power of the void." Watson had just killed the god of destruction and obtained the god's remains. Then, he had obtained another god's remains, and he merged the two remains without hesitation. Fusion system, activate. "Congratulations, Master, for obtaining a Starlight Tier product, a spatial elemental magical source." A star-like purple ball of light appeared in Watson's hand following the system notification, gradually rising into the sky and fusing with the entire world. With a magic symbol that looked like a door in the center, 10 other Starlight Tier magical sources appeared in the sky, with different magical elements flashing in midair. Watson had created the 11th magical source, Spatial Elemental Magical Source. Starlight Tier product, Spatial Elemental Magical Source. Effect: Spatial Elemental Magical Source contains spatial magic. After using it, one can obtain spatial transference, sealing, cutting, shattering, and other magical skills. Additional effect: Space Immutability. After obtaining the Spatial Elemental Magical Source, the world's space will be permanently reinforced. Only those at peak Starlight Tier will have the ability to shatter it. Staring at the new magical source that was slowly rising above his head, Watson reached out his right hand toward the other gods who were panicking and continuously retreating and gently clenched it. Spatial Seal. The voice was not loud, but it echoed throughout the entire area. An incomparably large arm appeared in the sky, formed entirely of purple void energy, and when it clenched, the space wherever it passed would freeze. The purple palm enveloped every god within, threatening to crush them along with the frozen space. Star Kingdom. Many gods' expressions darkened when faced with Watson's attack. Only the Twilight Star Spirit Bones, whose entire body was covered in a strange color, moved their chin. Starlight burst from the surface of his body and fused into a colorful, turbid divine kingdom in midair. Turbid and gorgeous, those two seemingly contradictory characteristics were reflected in the same divine kingdom. The divine kingdom summoned by the Twilight Star Spirit was different from the other divine kingdoms. Calling it a divine kingdom was better than calling it a planet. There were many kingdoms on a planet. Various people lived in their respective kingdoms and fought against each other. The cycle of reincarnation did not stop, and that powerful force spread in all directions when Watson used the spatial sealing hand created by the fusion of the spatial elemental magic source. Cracks appeared in front of that power of reincarnation, and it shattered into tiny purple crystal shards in the air when Watson used the spatial sealing hand created by the fusion of the spatial elemental magical source. The space passage above his head was revealed. Twilight Star Spirit's deep skull eye sockets flickered with light. Even if there was no flesh and blood, one could see the joy in his heart. The other gods behind him were even more ecstatic. They had just descended into that world from outside the space passage, and they could not wait to take everything in that world for themselves. They could not wait to leave that place as soon as possible. Their state of mind had changed drastically in a short period. Watson did not continue to attack when he saw that the numerous gods were preparing to leave that realm under the guidance of the Twilight Star Spirit. Instead, he placed his hands behind his back, and a tinge of mockery came into his eyes. Molecular deceleration. A cold female voice came from the sky's end, and the entire sky, including the space passage, was frozen by the cold, solid ice. The sky was a layer of azure blue solid ice, reflecting everything below. Nia stepped on the cold air and came over. Her black dress fluttered along with her graceful curves. 6 massive wings composed of many wings gently extended out behind her, covering the sky, and the sky blue eyes on her lovely face were as difficult to look at as the ice that had been summoned. A tremendous starlight tear aura spread from her body. Nia used to be the king of angels, but she was not like the Black Moon Knights. After being raised to the Starlight Tier by Watson, the strength she could unleash far exceeded that of that tier. After all, she was only at gold tier previously and could already unleash the might of gods. Even a peak starlight tier existence would have to kneel in front of the power of a king. Nia's strength, according to Watson, might be even greater than his. She was one of his trump cards. Who is that girl, and why is the power she emits so strong? Furthermore, the aura emanating from her body makes me feel a little familiar. In a trance, a god glanced in the direction of Nia and whispered softly. I also feel like she's very familiar. I feel like I've seen her somewhere before, another god said. Just as those gods were perplexed and unsure of the girl's identity in front of them, the Twilight Star Spirit took a step forward. The skeleton's chin opened and closed with great amplitude. Don't tell me you used to dominate this territory. The brightness of your wings is sufficient to illuminate the many heavens and kingdoms. Right? Are you the King of Angels who sits atop the frozen throne? King of Angels. Hearing the Twilight Star Spirit's words, the remaining gods looked at Nia again, carefully sizing her up. At that time, the more they looked, the more surprised they were. The crown formed by the angel halo on Nia's head was beautiful, but the light emitted from the angel wings on her body was not something ordinary angels could compare to in terms of intensity or brightness. In addition, the aura emitted from her body was enough to make them submit. She was definitely the king of angels. It was unfathomable that a powerful sovereign tier elite, the top commander of a race, would appear in such a small world. In response to the Twilight Star Spirit's question, Nia responded slowly, King of Angels, that was my name in the past, but I have not used it in a long time. My current name is Nia, and I am only a handmaiden by young Master Watson's side. A handmaiden? Really? It was not just the other gods who were surprised at the time, the Twilight Star Spirit was as well. Why was the King of Angels serving a human as a handmaiden? What kind of human being would have such great prestige? Or was the human not simple? He could be the son of a certain race's reincarnated god. The Twilight Star Spirit could not help but look in the direction of Watson and gritted his teeth. When he first entered that world, he had not expected Watson to have such a strong background, just as the King of Angels was already a supreme existence that he could not afford to offend. Then, there seemed to be an important figure who was even stronger than the King of Angels. He had no idea what was happening in that small world. How could so many significant figures be assembled if there were also 100,000 gods? Could that small world be the backyard of a particular god king? The Twilight Star Spirit did not fly toward the frozen sky longer as he thought in his heart, knowing that in the face of the power of the King of Angels, even if he used all of his strength to bombard the frozen spot for a day and a night, he might not be able to blast it open. After a brief pause, he bowed and knelt to the ground, lowering his massive head. Greetings to the King of Angels and the Master of the King of Angels. I have entered this world by mistake, and I have no intention of harming the people here. I hope the King of Angels and your Master can be magnanimous and spare my life. We did not intend to come here either. When the other gods saw how the Twilight Star Spirit was so courteous, they realized they should not be foolish and began to protect themselves. No matter how you entered this world, since you are here, don't think of leaving so easily. I won't kill you, but you must stay and work for me, Watson said with a smile. The content of his calm tone was shocking. He had never detained a god to work for him. Even in the ancient times when gods were rampant, gods were still high and mighty and would not be treated as slaves. Watson's comments enraged a god whose entire body was like a ball of streaming flesh. He appeared afraid. How can I be the subordinate to a mortal? I would rather die here if you want me to aid you with your task. As he spoke, the flowing meatball surged toward Watson, growing larger as it traveled, and the facial features on the meatball's surface converged around the center. The divine kingdom of flesh and blood. The meatball belonged to the Flesh Mountain Demon King race, which had almost infinite life. When they were born, they were giant meatballs that grew rapidly. When the Flesh Mountain Demon King race was young, their entire body was the size of a small hill, but when they were adults, they could turn their flesh into the size of a world. An entire planet's worth of flesh and blood. One would think that a powerful attack on such a world would be difficult to penetrate, but the weight of flesh and blood alone was enough to crush the world. Furthermore, the Flesh Mountain Demon King clan possessed another ability. They could store non-fatal attacks and release them after stacking them. That characteristic of absorbing attacks and counter-attacking made the Flesh Mountain Demon King clan one of the top 100 entities in the entire Divine Kingdom. At that moment, the Flesh Mountain Demon King's god summoned the Divine Kingdom that belonged to it, and his body swelled to the limit and overlapped with the Divine Kingdom. A world made entirely of flesh and blood appeared and landed in front of Watson, descended with thunderous momentum in the direction of the Dwarven Kingdom. It was easy to envision that if such a massive body landed on the Dwarven Kingdom, it would crush the entire kingdom. Molecular acceleration. Watson smiled and extended out his finger, a light spot appearing from his fingertip and floating toward the surface of the Flesh Mountain Demon King's body as he looked up at the big lump of flesh over his head. The Flesh Mountain Demon King's god looked down on it, laughing in his heart at Watson's futile efforts because he knew how powerful his defense was. Even the Twilight Star Spirit could not break through his defense, even the King of Angels' molecular deceleration could only freeze it, not kill it directly. None of that could harm him, only a light dot launched by the demigod Watson could. Furthermore, as long as a bit of tissue remained in his body, he could be restored by ingesting more objects. Just as the god of the Flesh Mountain Demon King was contemplating that, the light spot collided with his body, causing a loud noise. The light spot expanded and ignited his body, instantly turning him into a pile of ashes. The power that exploded from the light spot had surpassed peak starlight tier. How could that be? Fear gripped the god of the Flesh Mountain Demon King clan. He tried to say something, but his body had already melted along with the burning flames before he could open his mouth. He intended to demonstrate his tremendous defense in front of Watson, then utilize the Flesh Mountain Demon King clan's reputation to terrify them. He was not scared Watson would not be merciful. The case's progress had been beyond his expectations. The gods present were silent as they watched the god of the Flesh Mountain Demon King clan burn to ashes with a flick of Watson's finger. It's a pity that you made the wrong decision. Watson blew on his finger. The molecular acceleration of the human race could accelerate energy and allow energy to be transferred from other people's bodies. He had just transferred the energy in 100,000 Black Moon Iron Knights' bodies to himself. Only then would he be able to kill the god of the Flesh Mountain Demon King clan instantly. He turned around to face the other gods in the sky. Watson said, "I want you to become my servants. Who agrees to this? And who disagrees?" "I agree." "I agree as well." The gods, led by the Twilight Star Spirit, agreed one after the other. They no longer dared to resist after seeing the killing of the Flesh Mountain Demon King. The god of the Flesh Mountain Demon King's defense was far superior to theirs. Watson annihilated them all with a single finger. It would most likely be enough to wipe them out with a single breath. They were left with only one emotion in their hearts, and that was remorse. They would not have barged in if they had realized there were so many gods living in that small world. Since everyone agrees, there is nothing else to say. I will delegate a task to you. What you must do is quite simple. Later, when you return to the skies, get more gods to access that location. I will let you go if you can get 100 gods. There will be a reward if you exceed that amount. But do not blame me for being impolite if you choose to flee. Nia, please assist me in reopening the frozen passage in the sky caused by molecular deceleration. Watson waved his hand, and Nia immediately removed the frozen ice. I wonder what's the reward if we bring in more than 100 gods, the Twilight Star Spirit inquired cautiously. If Watson's reward was good enough, he should try to entice some gods. Even the Flesh Mountain Demon King's race and the Void Insect race could not compete with the Twilight Star Spirit as one of the top 100 powerful races in the heavenly realm. However, it was not as though they did not have foes. The race known as the World Devourers was their most formidable foe. World devourers had bodies like black holes and were also world elemental life forms. Their way of survival was to devour other worlds continuously. Many Twilight Star spirits had yet to reach adulthood, but they were already being devoured by world devourers as if they were a world, causing the two races to fight constantly. Given how powerful that small world was, killing them would be deemed retaliation for his clansmen if he could entice some world devourers to visit. While they were deep in thought, the Twilight Star spirit heard Watson say, "My reward is very simple. I can help you raise your levels and help you obtain Peak Starlight Tier tools or even the Sovereign Tier 1s. Peak Starlight Tier tools or even the Sovereign Tier 1s. Is that true?" The gods' breathing became heavy. Is that true? They realized how tough it was to advance their tier after becoming gods. They could go for thousands, if not tens of thousands, of years with no change in strength. Of course, I'm telling the truth. Otherwise, why do you think the King of Angels is working for me? Why do you think there are 100,000 gods in this world? Watson's forceful statements made the gods appear skeptical. Initially, many gods were ready to flee without saying anything once Watson allowed them to leave that world, but they were willing to give it a shot. After arranging the gods' work, Watson directed Nia to bring those gods to the Divine Kingdom and allow them to attract new gods from outside their world. Nia was in charge of overseeing that. Watson leaped down and returned to the Dwarven Kingdom. The invention competition that was initially in progress had become a mess because of the appearance of the gods. Many inventions were crushed and dropped to the ground when the dwarves were escaping, and the number of damaged items was innumerable. The undamaged items were also buried in a pile of scrap metal that was like a mountain of garbage, and they were difficult to find. Watson kicked several broken inventions at his feet and proceeded directly to the Dwarf King, who was backed by a slew of ministers. "Your Majesty, the Dwarven Kingdom's invention competition is not yet over. Let us proceed." "Your Majesty, you must be joking. Continue? How can we continue now?" King Prussia's lips twitched, and a bitter smirk came on his face. He wanted to continue, but the conference hall had been destroyed. "Your Majesty, since you have no plans to continue the competition, I am likewise tired of fighting against the gods right now. Later, I will return to the Kingdom of Kings with the Black Moon Knights and Dragon Knights." Watson bowed to King Prussia. He turned around and was about to leave. "Wait." Heimerdinger, who was not far away from the Dwarf King, stretched out his hand and stopped him. "King Watson, now that the space passage has opened, the Dwarven Kingdom and the Divine Kingdom are connected. It's not good for you to leave before that problem is solved, right?" "What's not good about it?" Watson's face displayed an incomprehensible expression. "The Dwarven Kingdom appears to be incredibly powerful. I saw several innovative inventions at the conference. Even the gods do not frighten the Kingdom of Kings. Will the Dwarven Kingdom, which possesses these inventions, fear them?" When Heimerdinger and Prussia heard those remarks, they were powerless to contradict them. If Watson had stated such comments before the gods' invasion, they must have thought that the Dwarven Kingdom's technology had persuaded Watson. At that point, they felt as if they were being mocked when they heard that. After witnessing the gods' might, they realized they lacked the ability to fight the gods, let alone the Kingdom of Kings, who possessed an army of 100,000 gods. Their plan to utilize the might of technology to scare the Kingdom of Kings was doomed from the start. "Your Majesty, let's not beat around the bush. Let me be straightforward. A passage connecting the Divine Kingdom has appeared in the sky above the Dwarven Kingdom. I'm afraid that we will not be able to live like that. I hope that you can help us solve this problem." Heimerdinger lowered his head and swallowed his anger. He had just seen Nia freeze the void in the sky, stopping the gods from departing. They could not enter because the gods could not leave. Unfortunately, the space channel he built was only half complete. Despite its power to link to the divine realm, it could not be closed. "I can help, but I can't help you for free. What would you like in return, Your Majesty?" As long as you help to close the passage to the Divine Kingdom, we will reward you handsomely. I don't want much either. I will help close the passage connecting the Dwarven Kingdom to the Divine Kingdom. If the Dwarven Kingdom wants to merge with the Kingdom of Kings and become a part of my kingdom, or if you hand over the dwarf race chess piece to me, I can keep the autonomy of the Dwarven Kingdom. Your Majesty, your conditions are too excessive. The other dwarfs had already refuted it indignantly without waiting for King Prussia to speak. Watson's terms were the same whether the Dwarven Kingdom was merged with the Kingdom of Kings or the dwarf race chess piece was handed over. If they handed the race's chess pieces, the Dwarven race would suffer much more. They would follow Watson's commands in the future. Now, you are asking for my help. I don't care. I can opt to do nothing. You can count on your luck then. Watson spread his hands. Without even looking at the Dwarven ministers, he turned around and was about to leave. The Dwarf King said dejectedly, "Wait. Your Majesty, I accede to your request. I can give you the Dwarven race chess pieces." "Your Majesty, you can't. The Dwarven race chess pieces are race's treasure. If you hand it over to a human, would we be their slaves in the future?" The dwarves spoke hurriedly, and many of the dwarves were interrupted by King Prussia before they could finish their words. "Enough. Be quiet. We might be enslaved if we hand over the Dwarven chess piece, but we will not be annihilated in a short time. We shall be destroyed quickly if we do not hand them up and face the invasion of the gods, and we may not be able to keep the race chess piece then anyway. If you are determined to challenge this, then please tell me what other option you have besides turning over the chess pieces. How can you fend against the invading gods?" King Prussia's beard fluttered in the wind as he spoke, and he looked around with dignity. All the dwarves who felt his gaze lowered their heads and did not dare speak. They knew that King Prussia's judgment was indeed the best choice at that moment. There was something that Prussia did not say, and that was that the Dwarven race chess piece had been passed down from ancient times for tens of thousands of years. Even the ancient dwarf king had never truly controlled that chess piece. If he could not truly master the chess piece, he could not command the dwarves. Even if Watson obtained the Dwarven race chess piece, he might not be able to tap into its power. With that thought, he waved his hand behind him and said, "We always stand by our words. Since we have agreed, that Dwarven race chess piece is now yours." The Dwarven race chess piece, which had been covered by a massive protective barrier behind the Dwarf King, suddenly separated from the protective barrier and transformed into a chess piece the size of a fist that flew in the direction of Watson. Watson reached out and caught the dwarf chess piece. The dwarf chess piece, made of 3 flying stars that did not collide with each other, revolved in his palm. It had a high-tech aura. According to the Dwarf King's explanation and Heimerdinger's demonstration, he had a good understanding of the power inherent in that chess piece. As a result, after obtaining the chess piece, he acted quickly and started the fusion mechanism. The original golden-green chess piece that had fused the elven and human race chess pieces had changed once more after adding the Dwarven Kingdom's chess piece. The fist-sized chess pieces emitted 3 colored lights. Around each chess piece was a human face that was constantly changing, a miniature world tree, and a satellite filled with a sense of technology. "Congratulations, Master, for fusing 3 different races' chess pieces and obtaining the chess piece of the future human race. Sovereign tier item, future human chess piece. Effect, possesses the human, elven, and dwarven chess pieces' respective effects. Additional effect, future acceleration, the fusion effect of the 3 chess pieces can accelerate the molecular power and send it to the future, allowing one's power to synchronize with one's future self. Similarly, it can send items to the future and obtain a more powerful effect. A layer of time aura was applied to the evolved race chess pieces. There was a collapsed black tunnel connecting the 3 races, but no one understood what it was connected to. The fused chess piece had gotten stronger after combining with the Dwarven race chess piece. Watson's eyes, which housed everything in the world, became brighter as he felt the history of the dwarves' innovations that flowed into his head apart from the power of the chess piece. He had arrived from the modern era. Therefore, he was well aware of the dwarven chess piece's potency. That degree of comprehension even surpassed his comprehension of the use of the human chess piece. That pistol was nothing like the dwarves' handheld magical cannon. It was entirely a technology item. Holding the handgun, Watson fired a shot at the ground, mimicking the firing posture in his memory. Immediately, a smoking bullet hole appeared on the ground. That's right. As long as it is a technology in my memory, I can design it through the dwarven chess piece. I can even create some illusory technological products. The prerequisite is that there must be theoretical support. Watson tossed the gun he was holding. A pistol's destructive force may most likely demolish a gold-tier warrior's fighting aura barrier. It was of no service to him. The most essential thing he was going to make next was the most important thing he would create. A massive turntable emerged in front of him with a wave of his palm. The turntable stood on the ground and continued to spin. Since there was no air in or around it, the turntable's speed could not be faster or slower. That was what Watson wanted, to create a perpetual motion machine. That kind of thing existed only in principle in the world he was in, but since he had the dwarven chess piece, he could make that instrument. It would continue to rotate with no loss of energy. He opened his right hand again after testing with the perpetual motion machine, and two fist-sized explosives emerged in his grasp, which he flung into the sky. Two muffled sounds were heard in quick succession. It was as if two suns had emerged in the sky, and space appeared to be on the verge of being perforated and becoming unstable. Watson built those two bombs to be perfect atomic bombs. In principle, as long as nuclear fission is precisely regulated, the strength of the atomic bomb's explosion is maximized, and no pollutants were formed after the eruption. Nuclear fusion worked on the same premise. When the reactor was large enough, the power of those two reactions was equal to that of molecular acceleration. If Watson created a bomb the size of a planet and exploded it correctly, the energy released would be enough to obliterate numerous galaxies and even transcend peak starlight tier. Watson, of course, did not have as many resources at the time. I've used the power of the dwarven chess piece. Next, I'll try the power of combining the three chess pieces. The power of the dwarven chess piece was absolute technology. As long as the theory was valid, it could be converted into technology. After the fusing, Watson mumbled and activated the future acceleration. The power in his body vanished almost instantaneously. Then, behind him, a pitch-black tunnel appeared. In the tunnel, arrows were pointing at him. Unfathomable amounts of power were poured into his body. That power was derived from the future. His tier was instantaneously lifted to the starlight tier after entering his body. His aura grew stronger as the golden crown on his head doubled in size. The number of thorns on the crown increased, as did the number of forks. The starlight robe on his body turned into starlight armor. A long cloak that looked like a nebula fell behind him. 24 large balls of light flew out of the tunnel and drifted behind him when he changed his garments. Each ball of light possessed the power of a top-tier star. If one examined closely, they would notice that those were not light balls at all, but rather magical source balls. The magical source in Watson's body that the future had accelerated was more than twice as powerful as the 11 magical sources in the world. After sensing it roughly, he felt elemental properties he had never seen before, such as poison, lightning, ice, and spirit. In that world, lightning and ice elemental magical sources could be made utilizing water and fire components. However, it was a unique magical source that could only be obtained by altering a layer, and it would be lost throughout the transition process. Those two magical sources would be substantially boosted with the assistance of the magical source. Watson wore a massive crown, and the cloak over the back of his armor swayed. The 24 magical sources combined in his hand transformed into a 24-colored holy cannon. It was huge and tyrannical to the extreme. The dwarves were stunned. Even though they did not quite comprehend that Watson had just created a pistol and a perfect nuclear bomb, they could at least understand it. They knew that Watson was developing cutting-edge technology. However, they could not understand Watson at all at that moment. They only felt submissive when enveloped in his aura. That aura, the king of the kingdom of kings, has completely controlled the dwarven chess piece. King Prussia, the dwarf king, had a conflicted expression on his face. A human had controlled the dwarven chess piece, which no dwarves had ever done. Was that fate? Your Majesty, what should we do now? The usually resourceful Heimerdinger was also panicking at that moment. The aura emanating from Watson's body made him unable to resist. If not for the fact that he still had a trace of rationality, he had already knelt toward Watson. Don't call me that anymore. The current dwarf king is the king of the kingdom of kings. He is the new king of the dwarves now that he has control over the dwarven chess piece. King Prussia sighed. He had a complicated look on his face. He gritted his teeth and was the first to kneel to Watson. He took off his crown and lowered his proud head. Greetings to His Majesty, the Dwarf King Watson. Long live His Majesty. Greetings to His Majesty, the new Dwarf King. Seeing Prussia kneeling, the other dwarves also knelt toward Watson. Soon, the venue was filled with dwarves. Their voices joined and soared into the sky. Chapter 646, Is this the kingdom of heaven? Have you heard? What have you heard? Recently, many gods have disappeared from the region. Some people say that there is something in that region specializing in hunting gods. That was a specific area of the divine realm. A few massive creatures were conversing in the divine kingdom's void. A protective barrier enveloped a few stars. Within the stars, one could vaguely see some strange-looking creatures living within it. I heard that there is a small world where the mortals give birth to starlight tier elites. They deliberately opened a hole in the small world, luring the gods in there to kill them. Many gods have developed a fear of the small world and dare not go there. Some gods even retreated from that small world. The god speaking was a giant whose body was as big as a star. His entire body was covered with many giants with closed eyes. That giant belonged to the thousand-eyed giant, one of the top races in the divine realm. A few other giant gods stood nearby. After hearing the thousand-eyed giant's words, some of them looked worried, and some did not care. It doesn't matter. I heard that the small world is extraordinary. Not only is there a hole on the outside, but its inside is also at starlight tier. It's enough for the gods to enter. We will be fine as long as we are careful not to enter such a small world. Currently, the small world we are guarding does not have a hole in it, and the people living inside are not very strong. It is definitely not that one. The stars covered in a light barrier surrounded the giants' bodies. As they spoke, those stars flickered with light, making them look extremely beautiful. There were quite a number of those stars in the divine kingdom. Basically, each shining star was surrounded by a few huge gods. It was those dazzling stars and gods that formed the divine kingdom. Tens of thousands of years ago, the war of the gods shattered the world. The largest world fragment carried gods and existences above the level of gods into the divine realm. A world barrier was built outside to protect those who did not reach the same tier. Since then, two regions had appeared in the world. One was the outer world, and the other was the inner world. The gods were too powerful to enter the inner world, and those in the inner world had difficulty ascending to the divine realm. The inner worlds that resided on the fragments were called small worlds. Small worlds were a source of power for the gods, allowing them to absorb faith and gain power. Other gods enjoyed influencing the beings of small worlds. Of course, there were more worlds in the divine realm than small worlds. Those worlds were a part of the divine realm. They were frequently occupied by organized and disciplined gods with vast resources. The divine world divided territories in a different way than mortals did. They did not employ words like north, south, east, or west. Instead, they used star regions such as Centaurus, Andromeda, and others to separate areas. The Archangel Star region and the Waterdrop Galaxy were where such giants were located. The world we are guarding has only two kingdoms. One kingdom's people believe in the giants, while the other kingdom's people have built high walls, treating the giants as monsters. Even though controlling their beliefs is very convenient, the number of kingdoms is too small, and the population is poor. We can't even increase the number of believers. Why don't we just induce them to split into more kingdoms and let them balance each other out? A giant fiddled with a shining star in front of him and muttered softly. He could not enter the small world as a god until the barrier was removed. He could, however, understand the situation through the prayers of the earth's mortals and transmit a portion of his strength into the globe through prayers. It takes too long to split kingdoms and recover. Why don't we look for a few more small worlds? Didn't many gods quit protecting the small worlds due to that dreadful rumor? That provides us with a window of opportunity, another god said. The eyes of the gods present twitched as soon as he finished speaking. A few meteor-like rays of light passed over from a distance just as they were contemplating. Wait a minute, that is a small world. Furthermore, several small worlds are intertwined. In that case, can those small worlds fly on their own? Is their speed a little too fast? It feels like it's about the same speed as us flying at full speed. Why do those small worlds look so strange? Could it be that one of those small worlds has a world that can hunt gods? The giants discussed as they quickly retreated, vigilantly watching the few small worlds that were rapidly approaching them. After the few small worlds approached them, they finally realized that it was not a few small worlds that were entangled. However, outside the world barrier were a few metallic spheres that were similar in size to stars. The metallic spheres revolved around the world continuously, as if they were the small world's satellites. The small world seemed to have discovered a few giant gods at that moment. One of the 4 satellites that revolved outside suddenly burst with light, and soon after, a small black hole opened on the barrier outside the small world. People wearing black armor flew out of the small hole. What the hell is that? Are those ants native to the small world? What are they trying to do? The few giants stared blankly at the small world, at the black dots. Their bodies rapidly enlarged in the nothingness of the divine world, and they became giants capable of standing up to the heavens and the earth. A youth wearing a starry robe and wearing a crown walked out in front of those black armored monsters. The young man had a small smile on his face and beautiful eyes. At the same time, he instilled a sense of kindness, friendliness, and reverence in individuals. Hello, gods! I am the king of the Kingdom of Kings. My name is Watson, and I am currently recruiting gods who can help me build a kingdom. I feel that you are suitable. Do you have any thoughts about joining my kingdom and becoming a member of the Kingdom of Kings? A mere mortal dares to make us your subordinates? I think you are crazy. A thousand-eyed giant snorted coldly and opened his tightly shut eyes. His pure white pupils shot out scorching rays of light. The thousand-eyed giant's eyes were a treasure. They contained a large amount of compressed light elements, and the power they released was not inferior to the light element's magic power source. Tens of thousands of rays of light swept across the pitch-black void and flew in the direction of the young king, who only smiled and snapped his fingers. The 4 satellites surrounding the small world behind him immediately emitted light rays. A ray of light landed on the young king's body, forming a protective light barrier. The radiant rays of light swept across the light barrier. Even the outer shell of the light barrier did not shatter. On the contrary, the light barrier absorbed many light rays, causing it to become even brighter. When the light barrier appeared on the satellites, they turned their heads. The end of the light barrier was revealed, and a huge pitch-black cannon barrel could be seen on the bottoms of the satellites. Antimatter cannon attack. A jet-black torrent shot out from the cannon, and wherever it passed, the void of the divine realm would shatter. Endless explosions echoed in the void, and at the end of the explosion path, the giant god who had just attacked the young king, his body had already been devoured by the explosion, and not a single dreg remained. The god's remains wriggled and flew into the young king's hands. "That is already the 100th god we've killed." The young king pinched the remains and turned around to look at the other giant gods present. "Do you want to join my kingdom and become a part of it, or do you want to continue resisting?" "We'll join you." The giant gods looked at each other with bitter expressions. They knew that what appeared before them was the small world that had recently caused the panic they had heard about, and that youth must be the ruler of that small world. Regardless of the youth's strength, the 100,000 black-armored warriors standing behind him were all on the level of gods. With the addition of the terrifying cannonball that could kill gods with one shot, they did not dare to resist. It seemed like the strength contained in that small world was even more terrifying than the legend itself. Watson stood in the void, playing with the pitch-black remains of the gods in his hands. He used the fusion system to fuse the remains of the gods into his body. The power of the divine kingdom controlled by the thousand-eyed giant was of the light elements. After the fusion, it did not improve him much, but it was better than nothing. It had been a month since he had conquered the Dwarven kingdom. During that month, he had not been idle. He used the enslaved gods to lure nearly 100 gods into his world. More than half of the 100 gods were enslaved by him, the remaining were either evil gods with evil intentions or had spoken rudely. They were all used by him to make an example out of others. Part of the gods' remains that had leaked out of the slain gods' bodies had been rewarded to the enslaved gods, while the remainder had been absorbed by himself. Since he had absorbed a large quantity of them, his strength had risen one level beyond that of a demigod. He was close to achieving the true level of gods. Apart from enslaving the gods to help him with his work, he had also reorganized the Dwarven kingdom's territory into the Kingdom of Kings in the previous month. At the same time, he had also used the Dwarven chess piece to create many technological weapons and tools that had greatly improved the lives of the people of the Kingdom of Kings. At that moment, the 4 satellites surrounding the small world were one of his created products. In his previous world, 4 satellites had all the functions of the satellites. They could take photos from high altitudes, transmit signals, and even house people. Other than that, the 4 satellites also had some functions that his previous world's satellites did not have, such as the antimatter cannon used to destroy the gods. The energy used by that cannon was antimatter. The world was made of positive and antimatter. When antimatter and positive matter collide, they would be annihilated. That was a terrifying phenomenon. The energy in Watson's world, whether the original 6 elements of earth, fire, water, light, and darkness, or whatever he later created, belonged to a type of matter. He was able to create the antimatter cannon thanks to the Dwarven chess piece's absolute technological ability. Antimatter originally only existed in theory, and it was the power of the Dwarven chess piece that made it possible. It could be said that the antimatter power was more powerful than any of the sources of magic that Watson possessed. "Don't just stand there, follow me into my kingdom. I will assign you some work later. Don't worry. As long as you work hard in my kingdom, you won't be mistreated. Instead, you'll be rewarded. When you see my kingdom later, I believe you'll definitely fall in love with it." Retracing his thoughts, Watson gestured at the few giant gods who were standing there stupidly. Under the escort of the Black Moon Knights, he turned around and walked into the small world. Hearing Watson's words, the giant gods did not seem to mind. They were giants. In ancient times, they were also one of the top races. At that time, humans could only prostrate before them. At that moment, humans had wanted to enslave them. Not only that, Watson even said that they would fall in love with a mere human kingdom. He must have underestimated them. Humans might be comparable to the giants in terms of strength, but in terms of structure and aesthetics, humans had a short lifespan and had many mistakes in history. How could they compare to the magnificent giants? A few giants followed Watson into the small world with disdain, and the disgust on their faces froze as soon as they entered. The place where they landed seemed to be the kingdom of the dwarves. There were dwarves that were shorter than humans everywhere, and there were huge steel birds floating in the sky. They were things they had never seen before. Those steel birds were dozens of meters long, and each of them had more than 100 dwarves sitting on them. They were covered by a huge light shield and flew through the sky extremely fast. The speed of the steel birds was close to the speed of light. It was not much slower than their flying speed, but the dwarves inside looked calm, as if they were used to that. There was a brand new Dwarven kingdom beneath those steel birds. Iron tracks extended from the Dwarven kingdom in all directions. There were many long trains parked on those tracks. The trains were made of iron sheets. A long cargo box filled with platinum or diamond tier ores was at the back of the train. The train to the former Holy Dragon Kingdom's capital in the Kingdom of Kings is about to start. Dwarves who are ready to go can now begin to check your tickets. In front of a specific train, a dwarf in uniform waved the red flag in his hand and signaled the dwarves in line to hand him the paper-like things in their hands. During the check, the dwarf suddenly took out a brick-sized object from his trouser pocket with a glowing screen beside his ear. "Hello, wife? I'm about to get to work. Don't call me before I get off work. Otherwise, the supervisors will dock my money." "What are those?" The giant gods were stunned when they saw the steel birds, the trains filled with goods, and the communication device for long-distance communication. They could not feel any strong aura from those items, but they could do things that everyday magic could not even do. They felt as if they had entered an unknown place. "Welcome to the Kingdom of Kings. Are you surprised by what you see here? It doesn't matter. You will be even more surprised soon." Watson opened his hands and smiled. He said to the giant gods, "You can go to the coastline around the kingdom later. There are a few gods there who are reclaiming the sea and land." After assigning tasks to the giants, some of the Black Moon Knights flew out and led the giants who were still in a daze to the coastline of the Dwarven kingdom. Looking down from the skies, there were massive factories spewing white smoke all across the Dwarven kingdom. The factories' huge mechanical arms were continuously producing something. If one examined closely, one would notice that it was a bizarre weapon in the shape of a cylinder. Under the cylinder, there was a handle that appeared to be a button. The giant gods were perplexed as to what kind of weapon it was. However, they could tell that the substance utilized to build weapons was, at the absolute least, diamond tier. At the same time, they noticed iron carts with 4 wheels in several factories. They could run rapidly on the ground because there was no horse traction. The Dwarven Kingdom's floating islands in the skies had become a steel archipelago. The entire archipelago had been transformed into a detachable giant battleship. Small antimatter cannons surrounded the battleship, and the cannons were aimed at the sky, making people's hair stand on end. Skyscrapers replaced low-rise dwellings and palaces on the islands. 100 stories were considered low, and uniformed dwarves strolled in and out of skyscrapers. They ascended on mechanical elevators, appearing neat and full of the wonders of technology. The giant gods gulped. In their eyes, those scenes were fleeting. In the blink of an eye, they had arrived at the coastline of the Dwarven Kingdom. The north of the Dwarven Kingdom was connected to the glittering Golden Sea. At that moment, on the Golden Coast, a few giant gods were sitting cross-legged on the ground, holding a few square-shaped objects in their hands, staring at the huge screen projected on a smooth cliff. They were crazily clicking on some buttons. On the massive screen, 2 warriors clad in stunning outfits were slicing each other. Each of the 2 warriors' motions had a lovely sense of savagery that was attractive to the eye. Not far from the 2 gods who were pressing the buttons, a few gods held huge wine bottles in their hands. They drank the wine with straws as they waved their hands and shouted, "Hit him! Yes, don't let him get up. His HP is low. Quick, use your ultimate skill." Following the words that they could not understand, one of the 2 giants clutching a cube joyfully stood up. His body was engulfed in flames as a result of his overexcitement. The warrior on the left side of the screen slashed the blade in his palm after the cube in his hand absorbed the flames he released. A flame kingdom dropped from the sky, crushing and burning the warrior on the other side. I won. Later, you have to pay me with 10 bottles of water from the spring of life and help me work for a day. The victorious god put down the things in his hand, his face full of pride. The god on the opposite side, who had lost, looked sad. A few gods spotted the Black Moon Knights and the giant gods behind them and promptly put on pleasant expressions. We are not slacking. We have finished our duties for the day, so we are here to play games. As long as you complete your daily tasks, you can do as you wish. That is an order from His Majesty Watson, the Black Moon Knight expressionlessly replied while pointing at the few giants beside them. These are the newly joined laborers. Later, you will bring them to familiarize themselves with the environment. Tomorrow, they will begin their official work. Then, the Black Moon Knight left. A few gods surrounding the huge screen immediately went to the giant gods. There are new people here again. Before familiarizing yourselves with the work, come and try this game called Real Quick. Every time a new player comes in, we set up a bet. Hurry up and place your bets. Who are you betting on? Following the shouts, 2 giant gods were forced to sit on the ground. They picked up the square-shaped controls that the other gods had just operated. After listening to the explanation, they controlled the characters on the screen to start fighting with only a little understanding. What was so fun about fighting virtual characters? The 2 giants thought so at first, but soon they stared at the screen with total concentration. Some of the giants even stood up in excitement after the fight, and the shouts of the other gods beside them also resounded through the sky. They did not know why the game was so attractive. The pleasure of killing others was much better than fighting alone. After all, they would get hurt in a real battle, they did not have such concerns when playing the game. After the battle, the gods would fill bottles with water from the spring of life for the victors to enjoy. Water from the spring of life had almost dried up after the war between the gods tens of thousands of years ago, but they could drink it as much as they wanted there. That made the giants, who initially did not have any expectations for that small world and even looked down on it, could not help but wonder, could that be the kingdom of heaven? Chapter 647, Pointing at Thorn Empire. At the Dwarven Kingdom. Your Majesty, these are the documents recently sent from all over the Dwarven Kingdom. That was the highest tier office in the Sky Islands. Watson was sitting on a huge chair in a spacious office. An official of the Dwarven Kingdom stood in front of him, holding a thick stack of documents in his hand. Bring it here for me to see. Watson waved his hand, and the dwarf respectfully handed him the paperwork in his hand. There were already a lot of papers piled up on the long desk in front of him. Watson, who was editing the documents, released his grip on the quill. He wiped the gap between his brows and examined the documents delivered by the dwarf. Those new documents recorded many significant events that had recently happened in the Dwarven Kingdom. The magical railway that connects the Dwarven Kingdom to the Kingdom of Kings has opened. The train will deliver high-quality ores to the Kingdom of Kings constantly. Within a year, the volume of platinum and diamond tier ores is estimated to surpass 1 billion tons. The newly appointed Minister of Railways has requested 10 million gold coins to construct a new railway and train factory, to connect every corner of the earth within the following year. The Dwarven Kingdom's factories had all been constructed. They could create a wide range of technological weapons, such as magical rifles, magical protective equipment, antimatter cannons, spaceships, and so on. At that moment, almost 1,000 factories had been constructed, and to a significant extent, that had solved the dwarves' employment problem. The number of gods enticed to join us has reached 100. The effective reclamation of the sea and land is due to the gods. They have grown to over 1 million hectares of usable land in just a week. The gaming console created by the gods has also been an enormous success. So far, no gods have indicated a desire to resist or flee. The game console has been tested successfully and can be put into production. Currently, many noble dwarves in the kingdom have expressed their intention to invest in constructing a gaming factory. It is reported that they are willing to give up as much as 100 million gold coins. After skimming through the documents in front of him, Watson's lips curled into a smile. All of them are now on the correct course thanks to the transformation of the Dwarven kingdom through the Dwarven chess piece. He had been thinking about combining that realm with the Dwarven kingdom to construct the Kingdom of Kings. It was a lovely notion, but it would be a waste of the ground on which the Dwarven kingdom stood. Different kingdoms and ethnicities, in his opinion, should be varied. He had just conquered the Dwarven kingdom. They were not like other people, even though they were subordinate to him. He still had to make a lot of effort to avoid feeling conflicted to help the dwarves and humans live in harmony. All of the changes to the Dwarven kingdom were part of his strategy. Only once the dwarves saw the benefits of being ruled by him and realized they could not leave did they take the initiative to communicate with the humans. Watson made the decision to transform the Dwarven kingdom into a highly technical monarchy over the following few years, making it the most advanced place on the planet and a beacon for all inventors. He created the game console to accomplish that. A spiritual need might exist in an evolved culture in addition to a survival necessity. Simultaneously, he invented the telephone, which was utilized for long-distance communication. The communication signal was transmitted by 4 satellites orbiting the Earth. The mobile phone was only appropriate for a few high-tier dwarves. It would take some time for it to gain traction. Go and speak to the newly established ministers. I have agreed to their request for funding. Let's start building the gaming factory. However, the nobleman who pays the highest price can only obtain the right to build the game factory. Since Watson became the king of the Dwarven kingdom, he had bestowed the title of Archduke on the original king, Prussia. He would retain the rights of the ancient royal nobleman, but he was no longer permitted to express his views on national policy. Watson waved his hand at the dwarf in front of him. After the dwarf nodded in agreement and respectfully retreated, he stood up and stretched his legs. Sunlight shone through the shutters that could automatically close, shining on his body and turning it golden. It had been a long time since he had gone to the Dwarven kingdom, so it was time for him to return. He took a step forward after withdrawing his arm. A massive teleportation magical circle appeared on the ground with a single step, and his figure vanished. Watson had already arrived aboard a massive spaceship hovering in the air when he reappeared. The spacecraft was streamlined and almost 1,000 meters long, and it was surrounded by antimatter weaponry. More than a dozen cracks near the spaceship's stern were gushing flames. The flames consumed the emptiness, creating a tremendous propelling force. That spaceship was called the Universal Spaceship. It was one of the technological weapons that Watson had developed. At that moment, there were only 3 Dwarven kingdoms. The antimatter cannons were not as powerful as the satellites that surrounded the world, but their power was not to be underestimated. One shot was enough to destroy a god. At that moment, the spaceship was the residence of the Archduke of Prussia. He hovered in the sky. The massive cabin door on the top of the spaceship opened before he entered. 2 lines of troops emerged from the steel cabin door. They were all dressed in heavy safety suits with clear spherical glass covers on their heads. They were armed with firearms that glowed with a magical radiance. It appeared to be quite amusing, yet their movement speed was not slow. The protective suits on their bodies were outfitted with metal exoskeletons, allowing them to walk on any surface. Prussia paraded his princesses among the soldiers to greet them. Prussia, dressed luxuriously, approached Watson and knelt respectfully on one knee. His yellow beard on his lips trembled. Your subordinate Prussia respectfully submits to His Majesty Watson. You may rise. A breeze burst from Prussia's palm as he stretched out his right hand, raising his body. Watson's soft and childlike face exhibited a compassionate expression. I have come to see you at this time to announce the Dwarven Kingdom's future development goals. The number of factories in the kingdom will exceed 10,000 within the following year. All soldiers will be outfitted with magical protective garments and magic firearms. By then, even common dwarves will be able to fight platinum or diamond tier elites. We must also expedite the development of the Universal Spaceship. Of course, the most crucial thing is to strengthen the Dwarven Kingdom's talent development system. While manufacturing that, we must also construct schools to train workers. I need more people who can adapt to cutting-edge technologies. You don't have to worry about the tunnel connecting the Dwarven Kingdom's sky to the Divine Realm. I will leave a contingent of Black Moon Knights to guard it. They will deliver word to me if they have a problem with any god. Prussia displayed a bewildered expression when he heard Watson's statements. Your Majesty, you have told me a lot of information all at once. This is not your typical doing. It was not that he could not recall what Watson had said or that he could not finish the work Watson had assigned him. He was simply perplexed. Watson had barely said a few words before he was done when he had earlier given him directions on his work. Why did he speak so much that time? He had the expression of someone ready to embark on a long journey and was concerned about his children. Watson turned around as if to make his point and said, I am leaving the Dwarven Kingdom. I am the king of the Kingdom of Kings. I can't stay here and ignore my own people. Are you truly leaving, Your Majesty? Can't you stay? Prussia appeared surprised at first, but then he felt hesitant. During his time with Watson, he had already come to view Watson as his king. In the beginning, he had brought Watson to the Dwarven Kingdom solely to demonstrate his strength and to teach Watson a lesson. However, after witnessing Watson and the Black Moon Knight's fearsome might, he quickly disregarded that notion. Watson's subsequent acts persuaded him even more. He produced a gigantic cannon capable of destroying gods, a technology device capable of improving people's lives, and even a factory that enabled many unemployed dwarves to find work. He also obtained a large wage, allowing the Dwarven Kingdom to become stronger. That was something he had not been able to achieve in decades. Watson had done them in less than a month. The dwarves were a simple race. People with great knowledge and the ability to invent things that regular people could not think of were the most deserving of respect in their eyes. No one in the Dwarven Kingdom could compete with Watson in terms of invention and creation. Watson was the most well-liked person in the kingdom at the time. Do not worry. I am only leaving the Dwarven Kingdom for a short time. I am not saying I will not return. You can look after the affairs of the Dwarven Kingdom while I am away. I can also carry out my plan freely. I am still quite confident in you as you used to be the Dwarf King. I wonder what plan Your Majesty has in mind? Will you make a move against the Thorn Empire? Prussia asked curiously. In his opinion, Watson had also taken over the Dwarven Kingdom at that time. 4 of the 5 kingdoms on that continent were under his control, leaving only the last Thorn Empire. If he were Watson, his next move would be to attack the Thorn Empire, take down the 5th kingdom, and achieve the continent's unification. Watson turned around. At that moment, his gaze passed through the countless clouds in the sky and drifted to an endless distance. His gaze flickered as he slowly spoke. His tone was slow but filled with determination. No, my goal is not the Thorn Empire. All I want is the universe and the countless other worlds spread around the Divine Realm. Yes, he desired not only the union of a kingdom or a continent. He desired all he could see. Even if he governed that continent, the gods remained a menace in the outside world. The gods had the ability to invade at any time. Since that was the case, why did he not simply fuse that reality with the other fractured worlds? He could even fuse the Divine Realm into it, reuniting the continent that had been shattered during the gods' battle tens of thousands of years before. Your Majesty, Prussia was so shocked by Watson's words that he could not speak. Watson's ability had previously been the only thing that had persuaded him. Such bearing inspired admiration in him. That was never something he would say. The distinction between a genius and an ordinary individual might be determined by one's level of ambition and vision. Steel dragons appeared in the sky as Watson's voice faded. If one looked closely, one would notice that those were not steel dragons but rather dragons encased in a mechanized shell. Some of the dragons' wings were also outfitted with antimatter cannons and magical weaponry. The Dragon Knights from the Kingdom of Kings had likewise transformed into mechanized equipment on the bodies of those dragons. Some wore firearms on their backs, while others wielded magical cannons. The 100,000 Black Moon Knights lined up neatly behind those Dragon Knights. Their black armor reflected the sunlight, and their capes fluttered in the wind, blocking out the sunlight. That awe-inspiring scene reflected in front of Prussia and the numerous dwarves for a long time, and they could not forget it. A massive teleportation conduit opened up above the Black Moon Knights and the others. A warm breeze came from the other side of the vast channel that linked the Kingdom of Kings. At Mount Creation in the Kingdom of Kings. Are the two of you really leaving? Young Master Watson is not back yet. Why don't you wait a little longer? A maid comforted the two people in front of her as they stood on the top of Mount Creation. A red-haired woman and a muscular male were standing in front of her. They were Jayla and Balroy, visitors from the Thorn Empire to the Kingdom of Kings. Jayla and Balroy shook their heads and smiled awkwardly in response to the query. There is no need. We have spent far too much time on Mount Creation. It is time to return to the Thorn Empire and report to His Majesty. He will be concerned if we remain outside for an extended period. The two people held large and little parcels in their hands, water from the spring of life, the sun fruits, phoenix eggs, and other goods were included in the packages. They were also lugging a few sofas and cabinets on their shoulders. They did not appear to be on a long journey but rather on the go. Since that is the case, the two of you may return. I won't see you off. I will inform young Master Watson about it when he returns. Is it challenging to leave with so much? Do you want me to send 2 dragons to accompany you? No need, no need. We can leave on our own. Balroy hurriedly refused. The reason he and Jayla left the Kingdom of Kings so quickly was not that they were unhappy there, nor was it because the people there were unkind to them. On the contrary, they had never seen anything like that before. Every day, a maid would serve them diamond-tier meals in a unique style and dress them in starlight-tier garments, allowing them to live like gods. They had almost forgotten who they were in the Kingdom of Kings since life was so joyful. They were forced to flee because they heard that Watson had invaded the Dwarven kingdom and captured the whole kingdom. At first, they did not trust the rumor. Watson had only spent a few days in the Dwarven kingdom. How did he manage to defeat them so quickly? Although the Dwarven kingdom was not the most powerful, it had a strong base. Furthermore, the Dwarven kingdom possessed a plethora of great innovations. However, they quickly learned that the 100,000 Black Moon Knights on Mount Creation had retreated to an unknown location. They had no choice but to believe that Watson had gone to conquer the Dwarven kingdom. While living on Mount Creation, they had personally witnessed the strength of the Black Moon Knights. Each of the 100,000 soldiers had the strength of a god. No matter what kind of enemy they faced, they would be invincible. After confirming Watson's conquest of the Dwarven kingdom, they began to worry about Watson's next objective, the Thorn Empire. After all, they were part of the Thorn Empire's 9 divine generals. They needed to inform their king about the situation as soon as possible. Jayla and Balroy were about to leave after dodging the maid on Mount Creation for a bit when a gigantic hole suddenly emerged in the sky. The mighty Black Moon Knights fell first through the hole that represented the teleportation channel, followed by the Dragon Knights on steel dragons. The dragons roared, and the Dragon Knights raised their magic cannons to the heavens. Watson, dressed in a crown and a starlight gown, descended amid the solemnity. The aura of a monarch quickly engulfed the kingdom, making all living beings who were observing him shudder from the depths of their hearts. Jayla and Balroy looked up at the sky in a daze. They suppressed the trembling in their legs and had the same thought in their hearts. Oh, no, we're finished. Chapter 648, A Curtain Rope. Where are you two going? Watson flew down from the sky and looked at Jayla and Balroy with a smile on his face. Using the spatial teleportation channel, it only took an instant to return from the Dwarven kingdom to the Kingdom of Kings. As soon as he returned, he saw Jayla and Balroy carrying large and small packages and preparing to leave the World Creation Mountain. He immediately came down to ask. Reporting to Your Majesty Watson, we have been disturbing you in Mount Creation for a long time. We feel bad to continue staying here. We are preparing to return to the Thorn Empire later, Balroy said with a twinkle in his eyes. Returning so soon? Did the servants not treat you well while you were on Mount Creation? Or are you not happy staying here? It's not that. Everyone on the mountain is very friendly. Furthermore, the resources here are abundant. There are many things that we have not seen in the Thorn Empire. We are very happy here. If that's the case, why do you have to leave? Faced with Watson's question, Balroy struggled to reply. Jayla immediately said, well, we are the 9 divine generals of the Empire. We are about to hold the largest annual celebration in the Thorn Empire, the selection ceremony for the divine generals. As one of the 9 divine generals, we have to go back for it. The divine general selection ceremony was the biggest event in the Thorn Empire. The Thorn Empire advocated the survival of the fittest. All the positions in the empire were gained through continuous battles and not through the hereditary inheritance of the noblemen. The 9 divine generals were the soldiers' top chain of command. One had to be a top-notch elite. It was even more difficult to maintain the position. It was time to choose the 9 divine generals due to the annual rotation. The existing ones might be eliminated. That was why Balroy and Jayla, who were at the bottom rank, wanted to go to the Kingdom of Kings to try their luck. I see. Watson nodded in understanding. He placed his palm on his lips. It sounds like that divine general selection ceremony is very interesting. Can I go and take a look? Of course. Jayla hesitated for a moment and said, Your Majesty, with your status and for the care that you have shown us, it is only right for us to extend an invitation to you. We will explain it to our king when we arrive at Thorn Empire. He will write a personal invitation and arrange the best seat for you during the ceremony. That's settled then. The 2 of you can leave now. I won't be seeing you off. Watson waved his hand and bade farewell to Jayla and Balroy, who were obviously relieved. The corners of his mouth curled upward, and a smile appeared on his face. Your Majesty, do we need to send a Black Moon Knight to follow them? Alan, the leader of the Black Moon Knights, flew toward Watson and asked in a low voice. No need. The fish have been released. We will wait for them to take the bait. It's not essential to let the people of the Thorn Empire watch the so-called selection ceremony of the 9 divine generals. The important thing is how the Thorn Empire will react when they find out about the existence of the Kingdom of Kings. I'm looking forward to it. As expected of your Majesty. You are indeed meticulous. You can think of things that we can't think of. Stop flattering me. Hurry up and transport the technological weapons brought back from the Dwarven Kingdom to Black Moon Castle. Before confronting the people of the Thorn Empire, I want to improve the combat strength of the soldiers on Mount Creation first. At the Thorn Empire. That was the kingdom in the east of the continent. It was near the east coast and the Holy Dragon Kingdom in the west. At the time, in the Thorn Empire's Crystal Palace. The royal palace of the Thorn Empire was housed at the Crystal Palace. Outside the massive crystal-like palace, 2 people moved quickly. Those 2 people were carrying huge and little bundles on their shoulders, sofa cabinets that looked like furniture, fruits, bottles of spring water stored in magical devices, and other goods that drew the interest of many passers-by on the street. Look, those 2 people should be Jayla, who is known as the Whip of Thorns, and Balroy, who is known as the Unyielding Spear. I heard that they disappeared from the Thorn Empire for a long time, and now they are actually back. The 9 Divine Generals selection competition is about to start again. It is normal for them to be back, but looking at the things on their backs. Did they just move back here? It's not a problem for them to come back. After all, the selection competition for the 9 Divine Generals is about to start. This time, I heard that several elites of the new generation are competing for the 9 Divine Generals spots in the competition. I predict that the 2 of them, who ranked at the bottom, will be eliminated. I thought they were searching for treasures that they could win when they left. Now, it seems like they only brought back some furniture and sundries. Are they going to give up their status as one of the 9 Divine Generals? The passers-by stared at Jayla and Balroy in surprise and discussed it animatedly. Some of those discussions reached Jayla and Balroy's ears, but they did not say anything. The things they brought back included the spring of life water and the sun fruits. Only they knew how powerful the things they had obtained in the Kingdom of Kings were. Every piece of furniture on their bodies was a Starlight tier item. Even if they knew the significance of these things, the people of the Thorn Empire would not believe them. They did not lack the courage to argue, but they were too lazy to contradict. They had journeyed for half a month over mountains and rivers on their way back to the Thorn Empire from the Kingdom of Kings. Their own strength was insufficient to return to the Thorn Empire instantly without the assistance of the teleportation channel. According to my calculations, the preliminary selection for the 9 Divine Generals competition is set to commence. Balroy's voice was troubled. Jayla, who was beside him, had a similar expression. I just don't know if His Majesty will believe what we say. The Thorn Empire's 9 Divine General selection tournament was nothing compared to the Kingdom of Kings. Even if the Thorn Empire chose 9 new Divine Generals, it was still insufficient in the face of the Kingdom of Kings' strength. With a heart full of worry, the two of them approached the Crystal Palace's wall. When the palace guards spotted Jayla and Balroy, they instantly lowered their heads and said, "Greetings, Lord Jayla and Lord Balroy. Go and inform His Majesty that we are back. His Majesty is currently gathering the ministers to hold a meeting on the issue of the 9 Divine Generals competition. Since you are back, my lords, you can go and join them," the guard said politely and looked at Jayla and Balroy with a strange expression. The two of them did not say anything else. They nodded their heads in agreement and simply entered the palace. There was a large hall not far away within the Crystal Palace. The hall's exterior was similarly made entirely of crystals. Under the sunlight, the purple crystals emitted a vivid brightness. The outside could not see what was inside the hall, but the inside could clearly see the outside. That hall was purposefully created in that manner. It was the meeting hall. It was a particular gathering place for the Thorn Empire officials to discuss national matters. At that moment, a meeting was being held inside. Jayla and Balroy entered the room without hesitation. In the hall, there were already 2 rows of ministers standing. As they turned their heads to look at Jayla and Balroy, each minister had a peculiar expression on their face. A long carpet extended to a high platform several meters tall in the large hall. A golden-haired youth, no more than 30 years old, sat on the throne on the lofty stage. His fingers supported his stunning face, which was reminiscent of a sculpture. His fiery gaze wandered across several ministers from time to time. He wore a gold leaf headpiece and a long jewel-encrusted robe on his head. It gave him an aristocratic appearance. The Thorn Empire's king, Gilgamesh, was a young guy with golden hair and ruby eyes. "Balroy, Jayla, I'm in the middle of a meeting with my ministers. You rushed in during the middle of the meeting. Do you admit your wrongdoings? Also, I heard that you recently left the Thorn Empire and went to other kingdoms. I thought you would betray the Thorn Empire and join other kingdoms. I did not expect you to come back at this time. Tell me, what have you done? What are you carrying on your shoulders?" Gilgamesh had obviously seen the furniture and other valuables Jayla and Balroy had brought back. "Your Majesty, during the time we were away, we went to the Kingdom of Kings. We saw a different scenery there, so we returned to the Thorn Empire to report to you, Your Majesty," Jayla stated politely. Jayla and Balroy knelt on the ground simultaneously, placing their stuff on the ground. "Oh!" Gilgamesh, who had blonde hair and red eyes, looked at the items with interest. "What did you see in the Kingdom of Kings? What do you want to report to me now?" The Kingdom of Kings, the original Holy Dragon Kingdom, had conquered the Winter Nation in the north and the Kingdom of Elves in the south and merged into the Kingdom of Kings. That was not a secret in the Thorn Empire. A secret agent had already told him the details of the matter, so he was not surprised by the kingdom that Jayla had mentioned. "We saw the possibility of conquering the Kingdom of Kings," so we returned with only one goal: to persuade your majesty to sign an agreement with the Kingdom of Kings. It is to turn the Thorn Empire into a vassal state of the Kingdom of Kings so that the disaster could be avoided, Jayla said earnestly. Meanwhile, Balroy, who was beside her, lowered his head and did not move, as if agreeing with her. The expressions of the other ministers, including Gilgamesh, changed. Gilgamesh was the Thorn Empire's youngest king in history. He had ascended to the throne before the age of 30. Gilgamesh developed the system of selecting the Thorn Empire's 9 divine generals, which he established. Gilgamesh had forcibly boosted the Thorn Empire's national strength several times over with his own strength. Of course, the biggest desire of a young and bright emperor was to expand his domain. Gilgamesh was the same. His greatest wish was to conquer the Holy Dragon Kingdom and occupy the other 3 kingdoms on the continent in turn. He would become the king of unifying the continent and recreate the glory of the 12th era's Tudor dynasty. That was something that all the ministers present knew very well. Even though they knew that the king wanted to become the king of the unified continent, Jayla and Balroy had said such outrageous words, making Gilgamesh give up the unification and become a vassal of the Kingdom of Kings. They were too bold. As expected, after hearing Jayla's words, Gilgamesh's face darkened. What do you mean? It's exactly what I meant, Your Majesty Gilgamesh. We hope that the Thorn Empire can become a vassal state of the Kingdom of Kings. Jayla gritted her teeth in response. That time, Gilgamesh had yet to reply. A burly man not far to the left frowned and said, Jayla, why do I feel that you've become timid after making a trip to the Kingdom of Kings? They had indeed subdued the Elven Kingdom and the Winter Nation. It's a very resourceful kingdom, but the Thorn Empire is different from those 2 kingdoms. Our strength might be stronger than the combined strength of those 2 kingdoms. The Kingdom of Kings' ability to acquire the Elven Kingdom and the Winter Nation did not imply that they could overcome the Thorn Empire. The burly man was wearing a mask with 3 eyes on each side. He had a peculiar appearance and had a long sword around his waist. Even though he did not use the biting cold sword aura, it was still whirling around him. It was difficult to approach him. That burly man was called Cecil, and he was the strongest of the 9 divine generals of the Thorn Empire. Not far away from Cecil, a thin and weak man with blue shoulder-length hair and a feminine appearance spoke up. Perhaps Jayla and Balroy were brainwashed by the people from the Kingdom of Kings. Or maybe they were affected by some kind of magic that impacted their spirits and did not know it. I originally disapproved of Jayla and Balroy continuing to be divine generals in last year's selection competition. Now it seems like we should just let them vacate their positions. You're right. Jayla and Balroy are the weakest of the divine generals. Their strength can't be compared to that of the other divine generals. They even went to the Kingdom of Kings for a very long time this time. I'm unsure if they were bribed there. In my opinion, His Majesty should strip them of their qualifications. Of course, it doesn't matter if His Majesty doesn't do it. In any case, His Majesty has already agreed to my request to become one of the new 9 divine generals of the Empire. Next to the man with feminine blue shoulder-length hair, a muscular man with a bare upper body opened his mouth to speak. The man with a bare upper torso had a cross-shaped scar on his face and a ferocious expression. Both of his hands were chained, and he was wearing pointy gloves in front of him. He did not appear to be a good-for-nothing. My name is Polo Bismarck. You 2 outdated divine generals. If you are dissatisfied with anything, you can look for me to put it into practice right now. But I have already stated that I will not hit women. Polo Bismarck, that is my name. You 2 outdated divine generals, you can look for me to practice it now if you have anything you are not satisfied with. However, I have already said that I will not hit women. The man who called himself Polo licked his lips. His gaze swept past Jayla's plump body and stopped on Balroy. Bismarck was a famous surname in the entire Thorn Empire. The Empire's Prime Minister's surname was Bismarck, and he was known as the Prime Minister of Iron Blood. Since that young man named Polo had Bismarck's surname, it proved that he had a certain relationship with the Prime Minister. Subconsciously, Jayla and Balroy looked at the Prime Minister, who was standing in front of all the ministers. The Prime Minister had grey hair and was resting with his eyes closed. His face was solemn. The Prime Minister had no intention of interfering with Polo's words. "Your Majesty, everything we said is true. We have no intention of lying, and the Kingdom of Kings has not brainwashed us. The Kingdom of Kings has power that the Thorn Empire cannot contend against. Right now, the most important thing is not to worry about who the 9 divine generals will be but to think about how to deal with that powerful kingdom." Balroy, who had been silent all that while, opened his mouth to speak. Gilgamesh's eyes flickered. He asked in return, "This is a high-tier meeting. Only the 9 divine generals and the various ministers can stand here and chat. What qualifications do you have left if you lose to Polo and are stripped of the 9 divine generals' qualifications? Deciding the 9 divine generals is the most important thing right now." "Your Majesty, all right, since that is the case, then we can only fight with Lord Polo." Balroy was in a bit of a dilemma. After exchanging a glance with Jayla, he made up his mind. "The two of you should attack together, lest others say that I'm bullying you." Polo gestured at Balroy and Jayla. His expression was arrogant, and as he spoke, a peak diamond tier aura spread from his body. It was as Balroy and Jayla had predicted. Polo Bismarck was indeed related to Prime Minister Bismarck. Polo was the Prime Minister's son. On the one hand, Polo's exceptional talent enabled him to achieve peak diamond tier elite status at such a young age. However, it was also owing to his own hard effort. He would train for no less than 10 hours a day, no matter what the weather was like, no matter how comfortable his body was that day, and there was no hurdle in the wind or rain. A genius was already more than an ordinary individual, let alone a hard-working genius. He had already ascended to diamond tier a few years before. He did not instantly face the 9 divine generals because he felt he still lacked something. It was not as simple as simply becoming one of the 9 divine generals. Instead, he wanted to face the strongest 9 divine generals. He might as well become the leader of the 9 divine generals if he wanted to be one of them. Subconsciously, he looked at Cecil, the strongest of the 9 divine generals. A flame burned in Polo's eyes. "I will begin with the 2 divine generals who ranked 8th and 9th respectively. I will show them how powerful I am. Then I will seize the opportunity to challenge Cecil and become the number 1 divine general." As he was thinking excitedly in his heart, Polo saw Jayla walk out after making a simple agreement with Balroy. She came in front of him and drew a weapon that looked like a hanging curtain rope from her waist. That scene made Polo laugh. Jayla had previously wielded a platinum tier prickly whip. Due to its quickness and the poison-smeared thorns on the whip, it was exceedingly threatening to ordinary people. Polo was also afraid Jayla might use that whip. He was not expecting Jayla to pull out a curtain rope. How comical was that? "Hey, you're not planning to use that curtain rope to deal with me, are you?" Polo moved over to Jayla with a sneer on his face. What made him feel even funnier was that Balroy appeared doubtful after Jayla took off with the curtain rope. His expression grew tense. "Are you going to utilize that weapon, Jayla? Should we switch to a different one? If we use that, the other party will be extremely dangerous." "It's fine. I'll use this one. Doesn't he look down on us and want to replace us as the new 9 divine generals? I'll let him understand the gap between us right now. Your Majesty, I'll have to trouble you. I hope you don't mind using this hall as our battlefield." Polo did not believe Jayla's words. He turned around and bowed to Gilgamesh. The king did not seem to care about that and waved his hand. "I approve of the battle between the two of you. I am tired from the meeting, so I'll treat it as a performance. However, there's no point in just fighting. I'm preparing to set up a bet. Ministers, why don't you take a gamble and see who can win this match?" Under Gilgamesh's instructions, the ministers took out their belongings and placed their bets. Most of them were betting on Polo's victory. "Admit defeat later, so that my attacks won't hurt you. This battle will determine the outcome and gamble on our career as the 9 divine generals. If you lose, you will be removed from the 9 divine generals. How about that? Polo and Jayla were less than 10 meters apart at that moment. He had spoken with a disdainful expression. No problem. Jayla nodded solemnly. Then let's begin. Polo quickly opened his massive arms in response to Gilgamesh's announcement. A strong aura erupted from his body, shattering the hall's dome. Thick vines pierced out of the ground, wrapping around his torso and transforming into green tree armor. Some even spanned his body and condensed over his head, transforming him into a tree-clad behemoth with 1,000 arms. Diamond Tier rules, absolute binding. Absolute regeneration. The 1,000-armed tree monster behind Polo quickly bowed when he extended his right hand toward Jayla. Its arms wrapped around Jayla from all sides like thick pythons. Jayla did not have much room to maneuver, and she was soon trapped by those tree arms and dragged into the air. Breathing through the crevices between the dense trees was tough for her. I can't take a single blow. Polo's eyes flickered. He had used 2 kinds of rules in his attack just now. Rules were an ability that only Diamond Tier elites could master. The power of the 2 rules proved that he was an outstanding Diamond Tier elite. Even Sword Saint Reed, the strongest elite of the Holy Dragon Kingdom, was only average when faced with his skills. Sword Saint Reed had been so powerful that the other kingdoms dared not challenge him. They agreed to sign the armistice. That matter had become a thing of the past after decades of hard effort by the Thorn Empire. The present Thorn Empire was more powerful than the Holy Dragon Kingdom or the Kingdom of Kings, and Polo was the new era's Sword Saint Reed. Die! He clenched his fists silently. The tens of thousands of arms wrapped around Jayla in the air suddenly contracted. Many of the ministers there could not face the thought of Jayla being crushed into a bloody mist. Some of them were happy since they had won the wager. A muffled sound was detected at the vital moment. Jayla's curtain rope, which she had been holding all that time, broke forth with a blinding light. Under the bright light, the curtain rope flew into mid-air and formed a circle, burning all the emerald green vines that Polo had called. A beautiful divine kingdom appeared in the loop. The walls around that divine kingdom were engulfed in flames, and the moment it appeared, it shattered the dome of the entire gathering hall, as well as the walls surrounding it. It slammed down hard on Polo. Polo, who was only a Diamond Tier elite, did not even have the strength to oppose the divine kingdom that was engulfed in flames. He was propelled dozens of meters away with a muffled bang, heavily smashing a massive pit on the ground. It was unclear if he was still alive or dead. The ministers around Jayla, including Gilgamesh, were all staring blankly at the curtain rope in front of her, which was generating a star-like glow. They all appeared to be dreaming. What is that thing? Chapter 649, The Empire's Counterattack. What is that? Gilgamesh's golden red eyes reflected the burning rope in Jayla's hand as well as the divine kingdom that descended from the rope. His fingers lightly tapped his face. As the monarch of the Thorn Empire, he was naturally knowledgeable. He could tell that that rope was not ordinary. The Thorn Empire worshipped the Thorn Goddess, and he would visit her every year. The feeling he felt from that rope was the same as the one he felt from the goddess statue. It was even more intense. It was obvious that that rope was an item of the gods. At that moment, he was not asking if that rope was a divine artifact, but what kind of divine artifact was it? Jayla, who was at the bottom rank of the 9 divine generals, did not have a weapon of that level. It seemed like Jayla had obtained that item in the Kingdom of Kings. Initially, he had not paid much attention to Jayla's description of how powerful the Kingdom of Kings was. At that moment, he was a little concerned. It seemed like the Kingdom of Kings still had a little power. Reporting to your Majesty, this rope is an ordinary curtain rope in the room where the Kingdom of Kings received us, Jayla replied to Gilgamesh's inquiry. A curtain rope? Gilgamesh was stunned when he received an unexpected answer. His fingers froze on the side of his face. Yes, that is just a curtain rope, but it is a starlight tier rope. We brought back many things from the Kingdom of Kings. That curtain rope is just one of the very ordinary ones. Other than that, we also have tables, chairs, and sofas. They're all starlight tier. Jayla indicated the tables, chairs, and sofas on the ground next to her. That furnishings appeared to be average. The power created would be far more than the window rope when engaged. Polo would not have fallen to the ground if she had not used those items. Instead, his body would have been crushed and turned into a pool of flesh and blood by the huge starlight tier items. Are those all at starlight tier? When the ministers heard Jayla's words, their gazes fell on the furniture beside her. Their expressions changed, one after another. When they saw Jayla and Balroy with the furniture in their hands, they were still mocking them. At that moment, their thoughts changed. No wonder the two divine generals would move so many items back with them. They were all starlight tier items. That had made sense. Other than the starlight tier furniture, we also brought other specialties from the Kingdom of Kings. Jayla was about to say anything when Polo fought to get up from the ground. With a violent grimace, he wiped the blood from his mouth and nose. I was defeated? That is impossible. His ambition was to become the Thorn Empire's Sword Saint Reed and beat the current #1 Divine General, Cecil, in order to succeed him. That dream, however, perished before it could be realized. You just defeated me with a starlight tier weapon. That bet doesn't count. If you have the ability, don't use that weapon. Fight me openly. Many people clicked their tongues as Polo's words spread. A regulation in Thorn Empire duels said that the weapons and techniques employed in duels were unimportant. They were all part of that person's strength, whether they were weapons or tactics. In a standard 9 Divine General selection competition, the contender could even use a secret weapon as long as no one else was present. Polo's statements made it clear that he could not afford his defeat against Jayla. You've lost. Don't find excuses. Leave, please. The ministers just contemplated it in their hearts and did not express it aloud. That was because Polo was Prime Minister Bismarck's son. However, Bismarck, who was in front of them, spoke coldly. Polo had a reluctant look on his face and gritted his teeth. No, father. I must compete with that Jayla today. Absolute entanglement. Absolute growth. Using the diamond tier rules again, thick vines grew under Jayla's ground. Some of those vines possessed tougher skin than the toughest ore, while others sprouted barbs. They appeared to be really frightening. Countless vines rose and crashed down on Jayla, who was in the center. During that time, Polo wiped the blood from his brow and yelled, "Do not use starlight tier weaponry. Do not be scared to engage in some light play with them." Jayla calmly flung the starlight tier curtain rope in her palm as she faced the approaching vines. Any one of those vines in front of her would be enough to kill a platinum tier elite, let alone so many of them. Even if she were a diamond level elite, the vines would still kill her. Phoenix Nirvana! Jayla shouted softly. Phoenix wings with flames and feathers sprung from her back. When confronted with the vine's attack, the phoenix flames immediately burned more than half of the vines to ashes. Unfortunately, new vines sprouted from the earth as soon as they were burned, encircling Jayla's body. The knotted vines rubbed together, twisting and tearing her body. Look, without the help of her weapon, Jayla is no match for me. Polo had an excited look on his face as he was shouting arrogantly. At that moment, he thought Jayla had been killed. Her twisted body parts were burning with the raging flames, turning her body parts into ashes. However, Jayla walked out amid the ashes wearing a fiery feather coat. She looked unharmed, but the vines behind her had turned into ashes. What was going on? The smile on Polo's face froze, and he was speechless. His expression changed a few times as he raised his right hand. He wanted to attack Jayla, but at that moment, a thin palm pressed on his shoulder. He turned around and saw that the person pressing on his shoulder was his father, Bismarck. He scolded him with a gloomy face, "Enough. You don't listen to me anymore. When will you end your humiliation in this hall? Polo wanted to react, but he did not have anything to say. He could not help but snort coldly. He had not faced Jayla with a weapon yet, so he was unsure. He had not struggled even after Jayla had let go of the weapon in her grasp. That demonstrated that his strength was inferior to Jayla's. Jayla, you can come back from the dead. What's going on? Gilgamesh, who was sitting on the throne, was also very interested in Jayla's technique of being reborn from the flames. So, he had asked curiously. Your Majesty, that is what I wanted to say about the other things I got from the Kingdom of Kings. Unfortunately, Polo did not let me say it. Not only did I get starlight tier items from the Kingdom of Kings, but I also got phoenix eggs, water from the spring of life, sun fruits, moon fruits, and other items. I can be reborn from the flames because of the effects of the phoenix eggs. The eggs I brought back were laid by starlight tier phoenixes. They can give one the phoenix bloodline's ability that includes rebirth from the ashes. A starlight tier phoenix. It can let people rise from the ashes. Is that true? The moment Jayla's words left her mouth, all the ministers cried out in surprise. I can prove that what Jayla said is true. In fact, those things are very ordinary in the Kingdom of Kings. We usually eat those, so our strength is dozens of times stronger than before. In addition to that, we also brought back a world tree seed, some soil and ores from the Kingdom of Kings. Those are truly precious things. Balroy followed suit and took out a few gifts carefully placed in jars from the package he carried. The first jar was the world tree seeds, which were like the crystallization of stars. The soil and ores in the other jars were also starlight tier. It was the same with the world tree seeds. The soil and ores in the Kingdom of Kings were called treasures because the other treasures in the Kingdom of Kings grew based on the soil and ores. As long as they understood the effects of those two things, the Thorn Empire might be able to cultivate countless treasures just like the Kingdom of Kings. I did not expect the Kingdom of Kings to be so rich. They usually eat phoenix eggs and drink water from the spring of life. Even the soil is a rare treasure in the world. No wonder they can cultivate the world tree. The ministers discussed it with Balroy. At first, they were full of disdain when they talked about the Kingdom of Kings, but they had restrained their contempt, and their tone was filled with respect. Gilgamesh's expression also changed as he sat on the throne. Jayla, is that why you want the Thorn Empire to submit to the Kingdom of Kings? I'm afraid that reason won't work. Even if the Kingdom of Kings has extraordinary wealth, we need to fight them for it. As long as we attack and conquer the Kingdom of Kings, won't those things be ours? That's right, Jayla. As one of the 9 divine generals, you're really cowardly to speak up for other kingdoms, Polo shouted from the side. Jayla narrowed her eyes and looked at him coldly. Polo's voice subconsciously became much softer. Your Majesty, I have a reason for that. The Kingdom of Kings has so many resources. How can their strength be weak? When I was in the Kingdom of Kings, I saw their army. The 100,000 soldiers are all starlight tier elites. In addition, their king, King Watson, also has complete human and elven race chess pieces in his hands. Oh, right, now he has even subdued the Dwarven kingdom. He even has the Dwarven chess piece in his hands. Dwarven race chess piece? The Kingdom of Kings has already annexed the Dwarven kingdom. Why didn't you say so earlier? Gilgamesh's expression became even uglier. There are only 5 kingdoms on that continent. Now that the Kingdom of Kings has annexed 4, only our last Thorn Empire is left. Sooner or later, it will attack us. Bismarck, what do you think of that matter? Should we fight or surrender? Gilgamesh's visage darkened even more. There are only 5 kingdoms on this continent. Now that the Kingdom of Kings has annexed 4 kingdoms, only our empire remains. They will hit us sooner or later. Bismarck, what are your thoughts on the matter? Should we fight, or should we give up? Your Majesty, I think we should fight a decisive battle with the Kingdom of Kings. As the last kingdom to be conquered, the Thorn Empire will definitely not be treated as well as the kingdoms that have long submitted to the Kingdom of Kings. Furthermore, we have been conserving our strength for so many years. Isn't it for the sake of increasing our strength and unifying the world as soon as possible? Now is a good opportunity. How do you explain that? The Kingdom of Kings is now a combination of 4 kingdoms. It looks solid, but the kingdoms that have just merged will inevitably have differences. In addition, the king of the Kingdom of Kings has forcefully controlled the chess pieces of the other races. How can the other races not have any complaints? We want to deal with the Kingdom of Kings. It may seem like we want to deal with 4 kingdoms, but in fact, dealing with the Kingdom of Kings is enough. As long as the Kingdom of Kings is defeated, the other kingdoms they annexed will naturally fall apart. Bismarck's eyes opened and closed, and light burst forth. The beard on his face trembled slightly as he spoke. Even though his expression was calm, it gave off a feeling of authority without anger. In the Thorn Empire, Bismarck had the title of Prime Minister of Iron Blood. It was not only because of his cruel personality but also because his policies were bold and decisive, and he would not back down. Prime Minister, you can make such a judgment because you don't understand the power of the Kingdom of Kings. I have just said that the Kingdom of Kings has an army of 100,000, and they're all Starlight tier elites. That army is enough to destroy the Thorn Empire, Jayla said anxiously, only to receive a cold glance from Bismarck. Have you counted them yourself? Perhaps you have only seen an army of 10,000 or even less. If I were the king of the Kingdom of Kings, I would also use a similar trick to show my strength in front of the envoys of foreign kingdoms. In fact, to create the illusion of an army of 100,000 people, you only need to ask 10,000 people to constantly replace the line, replacing the people in the front to the back so that you will always see unfamiliar faces. It doesn't matter even if the Holy Dragon Kingdom really has an army of 100,000 gods. Our empire is not that powerful, but we can seek the Thorn Goddess help. Don't forget the treasure Thorn Goddess bestowed upon our kingdom, which has been worshipped by wise kings of past generations, the Divine World Tree, which can break through the world barrier and connect to the Divine Realm. With that divine object, we can connect with the gods and ask them to help us destroy the Kingdom of Kings. The Divine World Tree, also known as the God's Twilight Tree, was distinct from the World Tree. That tree was born tens of thousands of years ago during the gods' battle. It was a tree with the gods' blood. The unusual tree that grew in the gods' twilight had the effect of perpetually growing once God's blood nourished it. It also disregarded any energy obstacles, including the world barrier. Strictly speaking, the Divine World Tree was a living entity that contained divinity after absorbing the God's blood. It was not a pure God, so it did not enjoy the same restrictions as the gods. The Divine World Tree was a foreboding sign in the divine realm. The gods had destroyed much of it, and the purposeful gods had left behind just a little fraction. One of them was the Divine World Tree in the Thorn Goddess' hands. That tree had been placed at the Thorn Empire, allowing them to summon her to assist in times of need. Gilgamesh sat on the throne, tapping his fingers softly on the chair's legs and nodding. That is right. I have the same idea. Our empire is the most powerful of the continent's 5 kingdoms. Why should we kowtow to other kingdoms? The Kingdom of Kings would submit to us. I will contact the Thorn Goddess and use the Divine World Tree to open a portal to the Divine Realm. I will also request that she summon as many gods as she can. The Thorn Empire will summon 1,000,000 gods if the Kingdom of Kings possesses an army of 100,000 gods. If the Thorn Empire surrendered, there was a high chance that they would become the weakest of the 5 kingdoms on the continent. If they did not submit, there was still a chance for them to turn the tables. It was not good to lure the gods from the outside world into the world. Those gods might threaten them, but it was worth a gamble. After all, the gods were high and mighty. They might not be interested in the treasures that mortals possess. In addition, the gods needed them to offer their faith, so they would not go too far. In comparison, the Kingdom of Kings, which was expanding at an alarming rate, posed a greater threat to them. Gilgamesh stood up from his seat and looked around after making his decision. The Kingdom of Kings has long expressed its desire to acquire our empire. It is just that I was not aware of it at the time. I am unsure whether you recall when the Death Dragon King Nidhogg always ran to the Holy Dragon Kingdom. When the new source of magic arose in the world, the zombie skeletons that crawled out from all over the Thorn Empire, those are the signals that the Kingdom of Kings is testing us. Now that the Death Dragon King Nidhogg and many other dragons have disappeared from the Thorn Empire, we have lost a lot of our combat power. If we don't seize the opportunity to resist, we will only lose more. When faced with the enemy's slaughter, are you going to give up? Are you going to kneel and beg for mercy in front of a powerful enemy? Gilgamesh's voice was clear and loud. When he asked his question, everyone in the room roared eagerly. We don't want it. What are you going to do? Fight. 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 Very good. From now on, I order Bismarck to draw up a strategic plan. After I summon the gods, mobilize the army. The other generals, please tell all the soldiers in the empire about this matter and get them ready to fight. Gilgamesh gave the orders one at a time. He cut his wrist by stretching his right hand. Bright red blood spilled from his wrist and formed a magnificent pattern on the ground. The tree branches extend out in all directions, forming a blood-red thorny pattern. Vines with bright red thorns wriggled and rose from the ground. They were just half a meter long at the start, but they swiftly grew to several meters, dozens of meters. They penetrated through the shattered hall's dome and extended into the unknown sky. The divine world tree, with blood that symbolized the dusk of the gods, was not confined to the impenetrable treasure room. Instead, it was contained within his body. Gilgamesh knew the meaning of the child of God and man, a saying in the Thorn Empire. The Thorn goddess that the Thorn Empire worshipped had given birth to a son with a certain human in that world. The boy was born with the divine power to establish the Thorn Empire. The Thorn Empire's first king was the Thorn goddess' son, and her blood flowed in the bodies of his descendants. Since it contained the blood of both gods and humans, Gilgamesh was able to open the door between the world of gods and mortals. Your Majesty, you must not. That will destroy the Thorn Empire. The ministers' faces were flushed as they gazed in awe at Gilgamesh. On the other hand, Jayla was afraid and wanted to stop him. Polo, who was by her side, had scoffed and used an even louder voice to cover his comments before she could finish them. If you are a coward, you can't be a divine general. If you are terrified of the Kingdom of Kings, you can hide here when the Thorn Empire strikes them later. Do not even think about going. The blood-colored thorns had already grown to a very high position in the sky. They formed a connection with the emptiness and eventually stretched out. The dense, blood-colored clouds had been tinted red. Various enigmatic symbols formed on the clouds and converged to form a round entryway. It slowly opened as it rotated, as though a dreadful wind from another world was blowing through the gap in the door. Ancient ancestor, I have called for your descent in the name of your son, Gilgamesh. Please bring the power of the gods and use your brilliance that the mortals can't see to help us defeat the Kingdom of Kings and capture their king King Watson. Gilgamesh stretched his arms and cried to the sky. His voice rolled and transformed into godly whispers that could not be clearly heard. The blood-dyed clouds and doorways in the sky were becoming transparent. The vast and boundless black nothingness of the Holy Realm and the bright stars in the abyss could be seen clearly behind the transparent doors. Suddenly, one of the stars shone brightly and flew down, accompanied by a majestic heavenly voice completely different from that of humans. I will fulfill your wish. The star drilled through the translucent barrier and out the blood-red door. It transformed into a lovely god in midair, his entire body enveloped in light, with huge and little gears whirling around his back. Gilgamesh was about to finish his song when he abruptly closed his mouth. He had summoned the Thorn Goddess, why would he summon other gods? Who was that? Chapter 650, The God's Descent. Who are you? Gilgamesh could not help but ask. My name is Baldur, the God of Light. I heard the signal you sent to the Divine Realm to capture Watson and defeat the Kingdom of Kings. Is that what you said? The voice of the God of Light in the sky shook the world, making the ministers and Gilgamesh's ears and brains buzz. You only need to reply to me yes or no. Without waiting for Gilgamesh to speak, the God in the sky added another sentence. That's right. Very well, I will help you take down the Kingdom of Kings. I don't want anything else, just Watson. Besides me, I also have 5 companions. The God in the sky waved his hand, and the massive blood-red door spun quickly. More gods soared out of it, emitting the aura of the starlight tier. Those gods had the upper bodies of humans and the lower bodies of dragon clans with wings. Some also had bright red bodies, wearing ancient armor, and 8 arms on their backs. Each arm held a different weapon. The gods were different, and there were 6 of them. Among the 6 gods, some had upper human bodies with lower dragon bodies. Storms and lightning wrapped around their bodies, and there was a substantial ship-shaped divine kingdom under their feet. They looked around and sighed emotionally. We haven't been here for a few months. In those days, we hadn't been able to absorb any faith, and we were worried that we would enter the territory of other gods and cause conflict. Now, it's time for revenge. This time, we must destroy Watson's kingdom and get the thing in his body, the god with 8 arms and a bright red body said vehemently. As he spoke, the 8 weapons in his hands waved incessantly, as if Watson were right in front of him and he was interrogating him with those weapons. Don't be rash. The last time we failed because we were too anxious. This time, we must obtain the things in Watson's body before deciding on the person to choose. I heard that the Kingdom of Kings has already occupied 4 kingdoms under Watson's rule. Currently, the Thorn Empire is our last chance. We must keep safe, the leader of the gods stated calmly. The other gods nodded. That scene caused the Thorn Empire ministers to be stunned. They thought that Gilgamesh would summon the Thorn goddess. They did not expect Gilgamesh to summon 6 gods that they did not know. Some ministers began to praise Gilgamesh. As expected of His Majesty. He is indeed powerful. Other than the Thorn goddess, he can also summon additional gods. This way, our attack on the Kingdom of Kings will undoubtedly be more secure. Baldur talked about it with the gods beside him. As he took a deep breath, the corner of his attractive face that was veiled by the light curled upward. It had been a long time since he had breathed in the aura of the small world. A few months ago, he had just entered that small world once. That time, he had only entered with his soul and a part of his power, but he had parasitized the corpse that King Landar III had prepared for him. He wanted to seize Watson's fusion system. Unfortunately, he had failed that time, and it had been a terrible failure. After that failure, the 6 gods had been hovering outside the divine realm, trying to get a chance to re-enter the small world. They could not accept being played by 2 humans. It was not only Watson who had plotted against King Landar III but also the goddess of shadow and potion who had betrayed them by staying in the small world. They were the targets of their revenge. After a long wait, their efforts finally paid off. A month ago, they discovered a passage in the small world that could connect to the divine realm. Agars, god of the wind and navigation, was the first to discover that passage. When he was about to enter the world, Baldur had stopped him. Baldur had said, "That passage is open from the inside. Watson might have opened it. It's dangerous for us to enter so rashly. Why don't we wait and investigate the situation before going there?" He knew that Watson had the fusion system and understood that, with the help of the system, Watson could increase his power by leaps and bounds within a short month. They did not enter the small world through the passageway, just as he had expected. Instead, they hid in the distant void and lured other gods over. Those gods were all captured or killed without exception after entering the small world. They even released the gods they had previously captured, luring new gods into the small world. The Black Moon Knights also moved 4 massive satellites out of the small world during that process. Looking at the dark cannon barrels on the surface of the satellites, Baldur felt apprehensive in his heart. As the king of the Third Era, he was in control of the most advanced technology in the world. He could tell that the technological power contained in those satellites could not be underestimated. They could instantly kill an ordinary Starlight tier god. In addition, there were no fewer than 100,000 Black Moon Knights who had arrived outside the small world. All of them had the power of gods. That had shocked Baldur, who had been aware of Watson's power. Those 100,000 gods, along with the dragons and sea folks, as well as different race chess pieces, those powers were enough to wipe them out without the power of the system. If they wanted to fight Watson, they needed more companions. At the time, the Thorn Empire took advantage of a good opportunity by using the Divine World Tree to open the passage to the Divine Realm. When they were in that small world, they were not idle. They had already informed others of Watson's possession of 3 race chess pieces. The temptation to the gods might be envisioned if a mortal in a small world had a chess piece that even gods might not have. There were already numerous gods watching that area, and there was no shortage of powerful gods among them. This time, we must get rid of Watson, Baldur muttered to himself. He and his companions had only spread the news of Watson's having the race chess pieces to the other gods, but they had not said anything about the system. They did not know whether they would use the other gods with the system. On the ground, Gilgamesh endured the pain in his arm and continued to summon more gods. He had no idea who the 6 gods he had just summoned were. Even if the ministers lauded him for his power, he did not believe it. What if the 6 gods he invoked were all evil? He called the Thorn goddess to be safe. With that in mind, Gilgamesh uttered a prayer similar to what he had just recited. The massive red door in the sky turned once more, and arcane magic runes lit up one by one. From within, the figure of a female god flew out. That should have been my ancestor, the Thorn goddess, right? Gilgamesh concentrated his gaze and noticed that the new goddess in the sky possessed the body of a giant. Her neck was adorned with 4 heads, each with a unique expression. Many of her eyes were closed, and some of them were half opened, exhibiting a red light. The goddess' hair was like a living python, dancing in the air and making her look quite frightening. That is not my ancestor, the Thorn goddess. Who is she? As he stared down at the blood gushing out of his arm, he cast a few charms in his heart. Gilgamesh turned back and stared at the sky after ensuring that there was nothing wrong with the ceremony. There was nothing wrong with how he summoned his ancestor, the Thorn goddess. Why could he not summon her? In the sky. When a new female god appeared, she walked straight to Baldur and the other 6 gods and raised her right hand. It has been a long time, Baldur, god of light. Primal Demoness, I do not recall ever informing you. I did not expect you to show up. Do you wish to exact your vengeance on Watson as well? Baldur's eyes, hidden under the light, narrowed. That is correct. After all, he sabotaged my plot with Frigga and even took away my mask of divinity, leading me to lose a significant amount of power. I will make him pay for it. Do not worry, what I want is not the same as what you want. You are free to take anything Watson has. I am only looking for his life. I want him to be tortured repeatedly in the future. His anguish will be the best source of food for me as I grow stronger. Deal. The primordial demoness reached out with her right hand. Baldur paused before reaching out his right hand to grasp the primordial demoness. During that time, the massive blood-red door in the sky had already reached its apex. It gave birth to a slew of gods. Some of the gods appeared alone, while others appeared in groups. The number of those gods gradually grew into the tens of thousands. Before the gods arrived in that small realm, they had obviously heard Baldur's words and knew why they were there. As a result, they did not say much. It was unknown when Gilgamesh's bleeding ceased. He had expended enough blood, and the Divine World Tree had settled. He did not need his blood to keep it going for an extended period. His expression was odd. He had summoned more gods than he had anticipated. However, none of the gods he had summoned was their ancestor. Another tremendous roar erupted from the skies just as he was straining. The blood-red door exploded, and numerous gods wearing purple armor of the same style entered the small world. Some of those gods rode mythological creatures, while others had war axes dripping with blood, and they all appeared terrifying. On the heads of those gods were a few long purple horns, with a purple flame burning amid the horns. That was the Hell Baron's symbol. The Hell Baron's army, which had been extinct in the small world, arrived there again. There were more than 10,000 of them, and in the middle of all the Hell Barons stood a man who was red all over and had 2 huge metal gauntlets on his arms. Hot white steam spurted out of the holes in the man's gauntlets. There were 9 long horns on his head, most damaged by the cuts. That's the Hell's Baron's army. The one controlling them should be the God King of Hell, an elite at peak starlight tier. I did not expect you to invite such an elite. The primordial demoness looked at the man in the sky with the huge metal gauntlet and clicked her tongue. The Hell Baron was a race in the middle and lower reaches of the God tier. The race had preserved the entire race chess piece. The strongest elite of the race was at peak starlight tier. Although he had not advanced to sovereign tier, with the power of the race chess piece, he could burst with similar power for a short period. That level was enough to be called a God King. After the God King of Hell led his army of more than 10,000 Hell Barons, the huge red secret door turned again. At that time, another army rushed in. Every member of the army was a yellow octopus with numerous tentacles. On its globe-shaped head, the octopus possessed 3 vertical eyes. Wrapped around its body and tentacles were colorful bubbles and dark mist. An octopus far larger than the other octopuses wore a crown on its head and sat on a throne in the octopus army. Various tentacles snatched ripped flesh and crammed it into its mouth. If one looked closely, one would notice that the ripped flesh in its hands belonged to a god. God King of Thulhu, I did not expect that the Thulhu race would also receive the news. I advise you to withdraw. The Hell Barons own 3 complete race chess pieces in that small world. I'm afraid that if we fight later, your race will be exterminated. The God King of Hell sent a message to the giant octopus king in the distant sky. The Thulhu race can be thought of as people in that solar system. It is natural for us to hear the news. However, God King of Hell, the star location you are in, is a long way away from here. If you have brought so many people here, do not convert them into corpses and leave them here. It just so happens that I have yet to taste a Hell Baron's flesh. The Thulhu God King stuffed the god's flesh into his mouth and chewed on it. Blood splattered everywhere. The scene made people's teeth ache. The 2 God Kings were at loggerheads. They did not want to give in and snorted at each other. They are gods and not just any gods. That is the first time I've seen an army of gods. The Thorn Empire's ministers knelt on the ground, one after the other, and peered up at the sky. Even if the gods in the heavens did not willfully release their power, their tremendous amount of life stifled them to the point where they could not breathe. Moreover, among the gods were 2 God Kings. The 2 God Kings brought their army and descended. The light of the blood-red door in the sky was much dimmer. At that moment, the light from the door lit up again. A female god with a human upper body and a huge flower as her lower body descended from the sky. That female god had many vines dancing around her body, and each of them gave off an aura of immortality. It's the Thorn Goddess. Someone from the Thorn Empire recognized the descending goddess's identity. Gilgamesh's eyes also glowed. He had assumed that the summoning ceremony would be ineffective in calling his ancestor. He had not anticipated the arrival of his ancestor at that time. While he was overjoyed, he was also concerned. Before his ancestor, tens of thousands of gods had descended. There was also a god king who led an army after that. Against those organized and disciplined deities, only one person could not match the Thorn Goddess. The Thorn Goddess bowed her head and looked lovingly at the people of the Thorn Empire as though hearing his concern. Then she turned around, and the massive flowers beneath her bloomed one after the other, the vines encircling her drooped, and she bent to the top of her head. The Thorn Goddess welcomes the descent of the God King. The formless clouds tore apart the clouds in the sky as the Thorn goddess words resounded throughout the universe. The area around the blood-red door had been entirely warped, and a claw had reached out. It was difficult to put into words how massive the claw was. A single claw was equivalent to a mountain. The body of an enormous dragon appeared in the sky as the claw was exposed. That dragon's body encompassed the whole Thorn Empire. The covering area would be considerably larger if it stretched its wings. Giant dragons of equal size appeared one after the other behind the dragon. Those dragons were all starlight tier. A small girl stood on top of a dragon. The girl wore a headpiece with 2 dragon horns growing from it. She was dressed in a lovely long robe with tiny jade pendants dangling from it. On closer study, those jade pendants were all condensed from stars, and there were at least 100 of them on her garments. 100 of them hung on her long robe, and the ripples created by the collision between them caused space to ripple. It's the dragon god. She's here too. Upon seeing the dragon girl with the crown on her head, not only the ministers of the Thorn Empire but the gods that filled the sky cried out in surprise. The dragon race was one of the top 10 races in the entire divine realm, not only in the divine realm but also in the small worlds. The dragon god, known as the Lord of the Dragons and the King of 10,000 Dragons, was widely recognized as the strongest among the dragon race. The dragon god was at peak starlight tier. Although she was at the peak of the starlight tier, her strength was comparable to that of the kings of the weaker races, not to mention that she had the dragon race chess piece on her. After the dragon god descended, the god king of hell and god king of Thulhu, who had just been quarreling, both fell silent. They were also god kings, great men in the deity world who had seized control of a divine kingdom. They appeared to be much weaker than the dragon god. 3 god kings have descended, and one of them is the dragon king. It seems like we won't have a chance. Some gods revealed regretful looks. In the divine realm, the gods were divided into different levels, different from the small worlds. As long as someone in the small world reached the starlight tier, they could be called a god. Other than that, there was only the division between peak starlight tier gods and god kings. The divine realm was unique. The gods in the divine realm were classified as low, middle, and high. The lower class gods were gods who had only attained the starlight tier, and there were no believers in the divine kingdom to offer their faith. The middle class gods were gods with a high status in the divine kingdom and had many followers. The upper class gods, who were elites at peak starlight tier, stood above them. The god kings, who were referred to as sovereign tier elites, were positioned above the upper class gods. Even if the strongest elite had not reached sovereign tier and was only at the apex of the starlight tier, they might still be addressed as god kings if they had a race chess piece. However, such god kings were not the same as true god kings. To be able to attract the 3 god kings, including the dragon god, to that small world proves that the small world contains a lot of resources. It might not be as simple as 3 complete chess pieces. We can only take their leftovers. A god comforted his companion, who had a dejected look on his face and also comforted himself. Dragon god King Oriana, let's make it clear beforehand that I want at least one of the 3 race chess pieces in that small world. Although you are very powerful, the Hell Barons are not weak either. If you want to take all the race chess pieces for yourself, I can't agree with it, the God King of Hell threatened them. You must be joking, Your Majesty. The dragons did not come to this world to be pawns. A race like us only needs to protect the dragon race chess piece that we have. As for me, I'm not the dragon god king. It's just that my fellow dragons love me and regard me as the dragon god, the dragon god named Oriana replied in a calm tone. Her remarks were heard by the God King of Hell and God King of Thulhu, who were both mortified. They were merely at the peak of the starlight tier, so they should not be referred to as a god king. They did, however, appreciate being referred to as a god king by other gods, which might have satisfied their pride. Oriana was stronger than them, although she claimed not to be a god king. That modesty was essentially a form of pride. No need to say more nonsense. No matter what Miss Oriana wants, our goal is the same: to conquer the Kingdom of Kings. As for how to distribute the race chess pieces, we'll talk about it after we conquer them. The God King of Thul, who spat a considerable amount of flesh contained in his tentacles, took a handkerchief from an unknown location, and gracefully wiped his lips. His words received the support of a large number of gods. You're right. Before conquering the Kingdom of Kings, it's all just talk. If we discussed the distribution policy now, it would be interesting if we did not conquer the Kingdom of Kings in the end. However, that should not happen, right? Some of the gods nodded, while others were joking around. The mortal king must know the location of the Kingdom of Kings. We might as well ask him. The God King of Hell turned around toward the direction of Gilgamesh. The Kingdom of Kings is located to the west of the Thorn Empire. Our world has a total of 5 kingdoms. Other than the Thorn Empire, the other kingdoms are currently with the Kingdom of Kings, Gilgamesh said as he braced himself. In other words, other than your kingdom, we can wantonly attack any place on this continent. The God King of Hell looked interested. He extended his finger toward a tall mountain in the distance that did not belong to the Thorn Empire. The mountain, tens of thousands of kilometers away, ripped from the center, revealing a massive breach. The entire mountain caved in. The deafening noise was accompanied by billowing smoke and dust, causing everyone to shake. Those who had not reached the god tier trembled. Time is precious. Let's hurry before this continent is trampled to pieces by the Hell Baron's knights.